Just confirming the live stream. All right, the live stream is started. So I have changed the host. All right, you can begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, very briefly, as a brief note, Judge Simpson's courtroom is being brought from his office. If someone walks in behind me, I'll try and shoot them out as quickly as possible, but just please continue, okay? Are there any pretrial matters from the plaintiff today?
Yes, Your Honor. May we begin with introductions?
You may.
All right. Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Michaela Chase, and I, along with my co-counsel, Thomas Azari.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
And Maria Kudasheva.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Represent the plaintiff in today's case, the estate of Genesis Petrillo. Your Honor, before we proceed to opening statements, we have some pretrial matters we'd like to take care of.
Well, Ms. Chase, let's hold on for a second and allow the defense to make their introductions, and then we'll get right to those pretrial matters. Defense, would you care to make appearances before the court?
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Laura Parsons, and today myself, along with my co-counsel, Vinayak Kurup.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
And my co-counsel, Logan Colson.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
We will be defending the plaintiff. We will be defending Harper Martini in today's trial.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Martini. Back to you, plaintiff. Let's go into those pretrial matters you mentioned.
Permission to invoke Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of all witnesses barring party representatives.
Defense, do you have any objections to this?
No, Your Honor, but we would like to point out that as party representative, Harper Martini will be present throughout today's trial.
Naturally, and I expect to see Mrs. Martini present for the entirety of today's trial.
Your Honor, we'd also like to invoke Rule 603, the constructive swearing in of all witnesses.
Understood. I have no problem with that.
And during statements, should we refer to you as both the judge and the jury today?
Yes, that's acceptable.
And Your Honor, should we ask permission before screen sharing evidence?
Yes, please do.
And do you have a copy of today's trial, Your Honor?
What exactly do you mean? I was provided a bench book by both parties in preparation for today's case.
Yes.
If that is your question. In that case, I should be good to go, and I believe the jury has also access to this document as well.
Thank you. And Your Honor, due to the nature of this trial, we'd just like to inquire about your preferences when someone comes across any technology or audiovisual issues. For instance, if their internet cuts out or they have trouble hearing, how would you like for us to proceed?
Well, if it's for a long enough time that that they're going to miss their chance to present to us today, I suggest you put it into a chat so we can get it fixed as quickly as possible. And if something happens to either myself or my fellow judge, please just hold on while we try and get the technological problem on our end fixed.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff is ready to proceed to opening statements.
Excellent. Defense, do you have anything?
Just one point, Your Honor. We would just like to draw your attention to Stipulation 3, which states that Exhibits 1 through 10 have already been pre-admitted into evidence today.
Give me just a second to pull up the stipulations. Plaintiff, is that your understanding of Stipulation 3 as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, it is so noted. Is there anything else, defense?
No, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed.
In that case, let's move to opening statements.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Your Honor, members of the jury, opposing counsel, may it please the court. The defendant promised and the defendant delivered. It is June 8th, 2019, the wedding of Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo. What was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives turned into one of the most tragic. Let's take a step back. Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto decided to get married. You'll learn today that the defendant, Harper Martini, who was the mother of Casey Soto, absolutely hated Genesis Petrillo. After hearing that Casey and Genesis would be moving to a different country after the wedding, you'll hear today that the defendant promised Miss Petrillo that if she took Casey away from her, then they would make her disappear. The day before the wedding, on June 7th, the defendant hands Miss Petrillo a special bottle of Cara wine. But you will hear today that that bottle had pesticides in it, the same pesticides that the defendant had access to from her winery. You'll hear that after Genesis Petrillo drank the wine, the effects were immediate. After falling ill, Genesis Petrillo was taken to the hospital, but it was too late. Miss Petrillo fell into a coma and died from pesticide poisoning less than 6 hours after drinking that bottle of wine. Members of the jury, this is why we are suing the defendant, Harper Martini, for battery. As the plaintiff in this case, we bear the burden of proof. We have to prove that it was more likely than not that the defendant intentionally mixed pesticides into that bottle of Cara wine, and she gave it to Miss Petrillo with the intent to cause harmful contact to her. Genesis Petrillo ingested the pesticides, and as the defendant intended, and because of that, Miss Petrillo passed away. We will meet that burden today, and we will do so by calling 3 witnesses. First, Angel Rodriguez will take the stand. You'll learn that Miss Rodriguez was a close friend to Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto. She will give you a detailed account of the events leading up to Miss Petrillo's untimely death. Next, Sam Arnold, a local business owner and the caterer for the wedding, will testify. Miss Arnold will tell you about the wedding and the inner workings of Peony Estates and how the defendant demonstrated her resentment towards Genesis Petrillo. Next, you will hear from Dr. Jimin Kwan, an expert in the medical field of toxicology, who examined Miss Petrillo firsthand. Dr. Kwan will explain how Genesis Petrillo's death was directly caused by the pesticides present at the Peony Estates. At the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Thomas Azari, will come before you and review the testimony given and the evidence presented. He will ask you to find the defendant, Harper Martini, liable for battery because the defendant promised and the defendant delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, plaintiff. Defense, do you have an opening statement for the court?
Yes, Your Honor. Can you see and hear me all right?
If you back, there we go. Yep, perfect. Stay right about there and you're in frame.
Yes, Your Honor. May I begin?
You may.
May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. I want to take you back to July 2019. Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo are putting the final touches on their wedding, this big moment of celebration. June 8th rolls around and it's memorable, but for entirely the wrong reason. You see, that's because in the morning of June 8th, Miss Petrillo was rushed to the ER showing severe signs of alcohol poisoning. And even with the doctors working there, they struggled to pinpoint her symptoms. Later that morning, Miss Petrillo passed away. It's a tragedy, a heartbreaking story, but not a crime. And you're going to hear a lot more about the events on that night in question because the plaintiff in today's case is bringing a charge of battery against our client, Miss Harper Martini. They're alleging that she poisoned her soon-to-be daughter-in-law, that she risked the relationship with her only child, her son, Casey Soto, and that she jeopardized the safety of a business that she had spent years building from the ground up. And for what? Because she didn't get along with Genesis? Members of the jury, today you'll find that that's just the first missing piece in the plaintiff's case. And that's because the plaintiff has a burden. That burden rests on their bench and never moves to ours during the entirety of today's trial. And that burden states that they have to prove a preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not. To succeed, they have to prove 3 elements: that an act was committed, that the act intended to cause harm, and that the act did then cause harm. And they're going to call 3 witnesses. But their story, as you'll soon see, has gaps. It has a lot of missing pieces. And we're going to illustrate those missing pieces for you today. First, you're going to hear from Austin Lewis. As the head winemaker at Peony Estates, he knows what he's talking about. And today, ladies and gentlemen, today you're going to learn how to make some wine. We're going to take you from the grape all the way to the bottle, everything in between. In addition, you're going to hear from Mr. Lewis about that Cara bottle of wine that the plaintiff brought up moments earlier. You're going to hear that it was found 2 days after Ms. Petrillo had been drinking from it in a dumpster that Mr. Lewis himself knows pesticide containers had gone into. Then we're going to call Dr. Cannon. An expert in toxicology and a longtime medical consultant, Dr. Cannon is going to tell you about the night of the 7th, how Genesis showed up to the ER quite intoxicated. And he's also going to clarify some important details about pesticides, how they work, and why dosage is so important. If there's one thing you hold in your mind throughout the entirety of today's trial, it should be this: the dosage makes the poison. Without a dosage, you have no poison. And finally, you're going to hear from Miss Harper Martini herself. Look, she'll agree she did not get along with Genesis, but she would never do anything to harm her son, her business, or the relationship with her future daughter-in-law. You're going to hear all the details straight from her mouth. And at the end of today's trial, the evidence will show that Miss Martini did not poison the bottle of wine. It will show that she had so much more to lose than she had to gain. And you're going to be left with questions, with missing pieces. And at the end of today's trial, that's why my co-counsel, Ms. Logan Colson, will stand before you here today and ask that you find Miss Martini not guilty of that. Thank you. Your Honor, I can't hear you. I think you might be muted.
Yes, I was. Thank you very much, defense. Give us just a moment to wrap up scores and notes real quick, and we'll talk to the plaintiff. My fellow judge, give me a thumbs up or unmute yourself to let me know when you're ready to go.
I'm good to go.
Excellent. Plaintiff, you may call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff would like to call Miss Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
Mr. Rodriguez, I'd like to remind you that you are sworn in.
Yes, Your Honor.
Excellent. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, I'm Angel Rodriguez.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a kindergarten teacher.
How do you know the parties involved in today's case?
I have known Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto since 2016. We met through a mutual friend, Drew, and we were fast friends.
What was Mr. Petrillo and Miss Soto's relationship like?
They seemed like the type to be people together forever. They really loved each other. In 2018, they announced that they were getting engaged, and we had to celebrate that.
And how did you decide to celebrate?
Oh, we went to a winery, Rosie and Pedro. By the end of the night, it seemed like everything was planned. The whole wedding was good to go. But later on, parent of Casey, Harper Martini, took control over everything, and everything changed.
You said that Mr. Petrillo and Miss Soto had a great relationship. How was Miss Petrillo's relationship with the defendant?
Harper would criticize and insult the closest person to Casey, and the two of them would argue constantly. It clearly put a strain over everybody involved.
And turning to the wedding, when were Miss Petrillo and Mr. Soto supposed to get married?
On June 8, 2019. Originally, we were supposed to have the wedding at Rosie and Pedro's winery, but Harper made them change it to their own winery, Peony Estates. And the rehearsal dinner was the night before, June 7th.
And just before we begin speaking fully on the rehearsal dinner, did you see anybody by the name Danny Francasio at any point in the night?
No, not that I recall.
So how did the rehearsal dinner go?
The dinner itself started poorly. Harper and Genesis were arguing, but it ended worse. when Genesis died.
Arguing, did you hear the defendant saying anything to Mr. Petrillo?
Yeah, I heard Harper tell Genesis, "I will make you disappear." I could not believe it.
And how did Mr. Petrillo react to being told that they would be made to disappear?
Genesis told me that they were afraid Harper is going to kill them if they aren't too careful.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay. To Genesis Petrillo's statements.
Okay. Plaintiff counsel, your response?
May I proffer? This is an exception under Rule 808.3 in reference to the emotional condition of Genesis Petrillo. It's a statement of the declarant's then existing state of mind and the emotional condition that proceeded to follow.
I'm sorry, 808.3?
Yes, 808.3.
Yes, go for it, defense.
Your Honor, there hasn't been proper foundation laid that this statement is an exception to hearsay under 808.3, as the foundation would have had to been laid that Ms. Petrillo was in actual fear for her life. We have not heard any foundation to whether Genesis was actually fearing for her life. Therefore, this is not an exception to hearsay and is inadmissible.
Plaintiff, I do have a curiosity question. Do you mean 803.3?
Yes, 803.3, I'm sorry.
I see, okay. Defense, it sounds like this statement, though, very clearly says she believes she's in danger. Do you have a different response outside of that?
Your Honor, while the defendant does say that she believes she's in danger, this still doesn't fall under 803.3 because it would have to be the then existing mental, emotional, or physical condition. And the foundation hasn't been laid for whether this was whether she was actually in fear for her life at that exact moment.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think the foundation has been laid with the statement itself. Plaintiff, you may proceed with your examination at this time.
All right. Did you see the defendant again any point that evening?
Yes, I saw Harper walk into the kitchen holding a can that clearly said pesticide. I was so worried, so I asked Harper about it.
And what did the defendant say to that?
Harper said it is for Genesis because Genesis is such a pest, and I was floored.
After the defendant told you that the pesticides were for Mr. Petrillo, did you observe the defendant having any other interactions between the two?
To my complete surprise, Harper decided to make a toast to Genesis. They made a big deal of giving everyone at a party a bottle of wine from Peony States, but Harper gave Genesis a special bottle. It was called Cara.
Did you see anybody drink the Cara wine?
Well, Genesis had multiple glasses of that wine, but they offered it to me, and I took one sip and didn't like it, so I spat it out. And nobody else had that wine.
How did Genesis act after they drank the bottle?
Well, they were acting strange, so I asked them if they were all right. She replied, "This isn't the kind of feeling I have ever felt before," and actually ended up falling asleep at the bar.
And what did you do as a result?
I took Genesis to her room. By the time we got to the room, Genesis looked flushed. She was sweating, vomiting profusely. She couldn't keep any water down. Genesis told me to call 911 right before she passed out, so I called 911.
After you called 911, what happened?
The paramedics arrived. I rode with them to the hospital. I spent the entire night trying to get in contact with Genesis' family, but nobody answered. Eventually, by around 8 a.m., I got the news that Genesis has slipped into coma.
Did the doctors say anything to you about what happened?
Yes, the doctor said it was because of some sort of poisoning, and I went back to Peony Estates. Casey had to know.
What happened when you got back to Peony Estates?
I ran into Harper, and before I could say anything, Harper said, "Genesis got poisoned?" Oh no, we'll have to cancel the wedding. I didn't even mention anything about poison or Genesis getting hurt. I was shocked.
After this, what did you do?
I went to find Casey. It was heartbreaking. She was already dressed and ready for the wedding, looking gorgeous. When I told her, she was in tears. By the time we got there, though, Genesis already dead. It was devastating.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Chase. Defense, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Rodriguez.
Good afternoon.
Before I begin, can you see and hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
Please let me know if this changes at any point.
Sure.
Now, I'd like to start by talking about your actions at the rehearsal dinner.
Sure.
So, Ms. Rodriguez, it's true that you were drinking at the rehearsal dinner, right?
Yes.
And you actually drank quite a bit during the night.
Oh, yes. It was a rehearsal dinner of my best friends.
You drank so much that you actually lost count of your drinks.
Yes, that usually happens when all of us are together.
But you actually can't remember everything Genesis said during her speech, right?
No.
And you can't remember the ride to the hospital?
No, but I remember holding Genesis' hand and telling that you're going to be okay. And yeah.
So we can agree that you don't actually remember everything that happened that night.
Mostly everything, but not everything.
Now, while at the hospital, doctors informed you that Genesis had slipped into a coma, right?
Yes.
And this was around 8 o'clock in the morning the next day?
Yes, it was.
So you hurried back to Peony Estates?
Yes.
And you rushed down the hallway leading to Casey's room?
Yes, that's when I met Harper.
And that's when you ran into Harper in the hallway before you could get to Casey's room, right?
Yes.
Now, on direct, you said that you spoke to Harper. Is that correct?
Yes.
And she mentioned Genesis being poisoned?
Yes.
But let's just keep one thing straight here, Ms. Rodriguez. At this moment that you've claimed to have spoken with Harper, you were still feeling drunk, right?
A little bit.
So you were still feeling drunk when you talked to Miss Martini?
Yes, I didn't have any drinks after we went to the hospital, but from the day before we have drinking. So yeah, a little bit drunk.
Now, on direct, you also mentioned running into Harper in the hallway before the dinner.
Yes.
And this is when she was headed towards the kitchen.
Yes.
You saw her holding a bottle of pesticides, right?
Yes, a can of pesticide.
So you asked her about them.
Yes.
And she told you, and you told us earlier that she made a joke about Genesis being a pest.
Yes. I'm not sure if it was a joke though.
But that's not all that she said, right?
Oh no. To cover it up, she also said that someone had a cockroach in the building, so it was for that.
She told you there was a cockroach spotted near the kitchen.
Yes.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, you're not aware if there's any recent infestation at Peony Estates, are you?
No.
Now, it's been over a year since Genesis passed, so I want to discuss how this has affected you personally.
Yes.
It's safe to say that Genesis's death was hard on you, right?
Yes, it was. She was my good.
And things between you and Casey haven't been the same?
Yes. No, it hasn't.
So you've taken it upon yourself to advocate for Genesis.
Yes.
In fact, you've worked with journalists,
I did.
with police,
Yes.
attorneys,
Yes, I volunteered anywhere that could be helpful.
and even with justice advocates,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
all to investigate this case.
Yes.
So it's safe to say that you've invested a lot of your own time into this.
Yes, I have. I'm really worried about her.
As much of it as possible
Sure.
to bring Harper Martini to justice.
To give Genesis justice.
To bring Harper Martini to justice.
And give Genesis justice.
So are you saying that you don't want to bring Harper Martini in specific to justice, Ms. Rodriguez?
No, that's not what I said. I said I also want Harper to get the justice and to Genesis to get the justice.
So you wanted to advocate for this trial to help bring Harper Martini to justice. Was that a yes to my question then?
Yes, and also to Genesis.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, you were not subpoenaed to be here today.
No, I volunteered. I wanted to help in any way I could.
Yeah, you're testifying voluntarily, right?
Yes.
In the case that you've advocated for so strongly.
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Colson. Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. To begin, Ms. Rodriguez, when on June 7th, 2019, did you start drinking?
Around 4, 5, or a little bit before.
And when did you stop drinking that night?
When I was with Genesis, when I was taking care of Genesis.
And when was that?
It was around, I do not remember the perfect time.
All right. And when did you run into Harper Martini next after you brought Genesis to the hospital?
So yes, sorry. I stopped drinking around 11 when I was helping Genesis, and Harper I saw next morning around 8 a.m.
All right. And one last question for you. Why are you testifying in court today?
To bring justice to Genesis.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Chase. Is there any recross on that limited testimony?
No recross, Your Honor.
Okay. In that case, I'm sorry, I cannot see your name. You are excused. Plaintiff, would you like to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff calls Ms. Sam Arnold to the stand.
Thank you. Before you begin, give us just a second to finish up scoring.
Sure thing.
Co-judge, let me know when you're all set.
I'm ready to go.
Sounds good. In that case, you may proceed, and I remind you that you have been sworn in.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hey everyone, my name is Samantha Ann Arnold, but everybody just calls me Sam.
What do you do for a living?
I run a humble little catering business called Carol's Kicking Cajun Cuisine, named after my lovely grandma Carol. We serve shrimp gumbo, pineapple shrimp, shrimp burgers, shrimp and potatoes, coconut shrimp, you name it, we make it.
How did you get into that line of work?
Well, I've been cooking since I could crawl. I remember growing up in the kitchen with my grandmama, my mama. We were always cooking. And on my grandmama's 98th birthday, she passed on her business to me, and the rest is history.
How did you get involved with this case?
Well, one of my longtime clients, Harper Martini's child, Casey, was getting married, and they asked me to cater for the wedding rehearsal and the actual ceremony. Unfortunately, though, the bride had passed away the night before.
How did the process for catering that wedding start?
It started in November around 2018. I had gone to the Peony Estates kitchen to check it out and make sure it was ready for everything that I needed to be able to cater.
When you got to the kitchen that day, did you see the defendant?
I did. I saw Harper carrying a pesticide sprayer bottle past a door marked employees only.
Do you know what was behind that door?
I do. I later learned that that was where the wine was bottled.
After you saw the defendant carry a bottle of pesticides into the area where wine is bottled, what did you do?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Can you elaborate a little bit further?
Yes, Your Honor. We're here today not to talk about Peony Estate's pesticide use. We're here to talk about a bottle of wine that was given to Genesis Petrillo from Harper Martini. The use of pesticides and Peony Estate's general pesticide use has no bearing on this.
May I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, I completely agree with what counsel just said. This question, as phrased, was after you saw the defendant carry a bottle of pesticides into the area where wine is bottled, what did you do? Now that's going specifically to the elements of our burden in today's case. That's showing that Harper Martini, the defendant, had access to both pesticides and the area where wine was bottled. It's our claim today that those pesticides got into that bottle as a result of Harper Martini's actions.
Defense, brief response.
Yes, Your Honor. Although that is true, I do not believe at this time that opposing counsel has laid the proper foundation to show a connection between the two, other than the fact that Peony Estates does use pesticides at their winery, which is not relevant to today's charge.
Well, Ms. Parsons, how about we give them a little bit of leeway? And if at a later point they don't ever bring up pesticides again, you can re-raise your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Azari, you can proceed.
Thank you. I'll ask that question again. After you saw the defendant carry a bottle of pesticides into the area where wine is bottled, what did you do?
Well, I wanted to start talking to Harper about the menu for the wedding rehearsal and the ceremony, but Harper had other things she wanted to talk about.
What did you and the defendant end up talking about?
Harper talked almost exclusively about Genesis Petrillo, Casey's fiance. She was saying that Genesis was selfish, immature, and just wouldn't stop complaining the whole time. Towards the end of our conversation, I could tell she was getting visibly agitated.
Had you known about any problems between the defendant and Miss Petrillo other than that conversation?
I do. Harper had said that things would be easier if Genesis weren't around.
I want to turn to the day of the rehearsal. How did your day start?
Well, I got to the Peony Estates kitchen around 11 a.m. that day to prepare for a long day of cooking.
Did you see the defendant when you got to the kitchen on that day?
I did. Harper asked me to keep a little bit of space on the counter for her while she was preparing the wedding gifts.
Did you see what kind of gifts the defendant was preparing?
I did. She was preparing multiple bottles of the 2017 Horizon brand wine, but I did notice that one of the bottles was different.
What do you mean by that?
One of the bottles was a 2019 Cara bottle that Harper said was specifically for Genesis. She said Genesis was getting something special and it would take care of their problems forever.
What happened after the defendant said that the bottle would take care of her problems with Genesis forever?
Well, I later heard Harper and Genesis shouting at each other in the parking lot.
Did you hear what they were saying?
I did. I heard Genesis shout, "You think you know what's best for Casey, but you have no idea."
I want to go back to when you were in the kitchen a little bit earlier. Did you ever see the defendant carrying a bottle of pesticides?
I did. There was a bottle of pesticide spray on the counter, actually, and when I asked Harper why it was there, she said it was to kill pests like Genesis.
I want to go now to the rehearsal. You mentioned that special bottle of wine was for Genesis Petrillo. Mm-hmm. Did you ever see Genesis Petrillo get that bottle?
I did. In fact, Harper asked me to give it to Genesis myself. Once I had given the bottle to Genesis, Harper emphasized over and over again that the bottle was just for Genesis and that Genesis should wait to drink it when she was alone.
After that rehearsal dinner, where Genesis Petrillo got that special bottle of wine, did you ever see or hear from Miss Petrillo again?
No, I didn't. The next day, we had all found out that Genesis had passed away.
Thank you, Ms. Arnold. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Azari. Defense cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Arnold. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes.
If that changes at any point, please just let me know.
Okay.
All right, Ms. Arnold, so you were hired by Harper Martini to work a wedding event for her at her winery, right?
That is correct.
And as part of that event, you were actually catering the wedding rehearsal dinner, right?
Yes.
Now, at this dinner, you arrived, right, in the morning, you said?
Around 11 a.m. that day, that's correct.
Around 11 a.m. And later in the night, you ended up delivering some bottles of wine to the guests at the wedding, right?
Yeah, I was asked to give the wine to the wedding party and give Genesis the bottle of 2019 Cara.
Right. So you delivered the gifts to the guests at the wedding dinner, and then you left, right?
Yeah, I went to go take care of the rest of the rest of my responsibilities.
So you never saw Genesis Petrillo open that bottle of wine, did you?
No, I did not.
You never saw if Genesis Petrillo drank from that bottle of wine?
No, I did not.
You didn't see Genesis Petrillo offer that wine to anyone else, did you?
No, I did not.
And you didn't even see how many drinks Genesis Petrillo had that evening, right?
No, I did not.
Because you weren't there at all to see anything that was going on, right?
Well, I was there to give the bottles, but then, yeah, I had to go back to the kitchen and take care of everything else for the evening.
So after you gave the bottles a gift, you didn't see anything that happened with that bottle?
No, I did not.
Let's go back to a little bit earlier. Now, you stated that you saw Ms. Martini holding a canister of pesticide, right?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Ms. Arnold, at any time, did you ever see Ms. Martini take a syringe and fill up from that canister of pesticide?
No, I did not.
Did you ever see her take the contents of that container and pour it into another container?
No, I did not. But let me just also say I wasn't watching everything she was doing. Just throwing that out there.
Ms. Arnold, when you saw the bottle of wine that Ms. Martini wanted you to give to Genesis, did you ever see her tamper with it at all with the pesticide?
No, I did not, but I wasn't at Peony Estates all the time. So I wouldn't know if she did it when I wasn't there.
Ms. Arnold, is that a yes to my question?
Yes, I never saw anything.
Let's go back to what you previously said. You stated you weren't actually at Peony Estates that often, right?
I was there frequently enough to understand some of the conflicts, but I was there mostly just to do my job.
Right. In fact, during this whole wedding planning process, you didn't even communicate with Ms. Martini that much, did you?
No, I did not. It wasn't necessary once I had the menu established.
Right. In fact, you worked most closely with Blair Osborne.
Yes, I did.
And the first time you actually saw Genesis and Ms. Martini interact together was only about a month or so before the actual wedding rehearsal, right?
That sounds about right, yeah.
Now, you stated you overheard some arguments, but during this time, you didn't hear everything that was said, right?
No, I had stuff to do, so I had turned around and went back.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Parsons. Is there any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, very briefly.
Take all the time you need, Counselor.
May I proceed?
You may.
Ms. Arnold, counsel just asked you a couple of questions about some of the arguments that you saw between Ms. Petrillo and the defendant. I just want to talk about those a little bit further.
Okay.
One of the arguments that we talked about on direct examination, the one in the parking, when was that?
That was the evening of the wedding rehearsal.
Do you remember what was said on the evening of the wedding rehearsal during that argument?
I do. Would you like me to repeat it?
Please.
So I heard Genesis saying, "You think you know what's best for Casey, but you have no idea."
Thank you, ma'am. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
In that case, the witness is excused. Plaintiff, you may call your next witness and give us just a couple of seconds to finish up scoring, and then we'll get right to it.
I'm ready whenever.
Sounds good. I'm ready as well. Plaintiff, assuming you have another witness, you may proceed with them.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we would like to call Dr. Jimin Kwan to the stand.
Dr. Kwan, please remember that you are sworn in for today's testimony.
Yes, Your Honor.
Dr. Kwan, could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Jimin Kwan.
What do you do for a living, Dr. Kwan?
I'm the Chief Emergency Physician at River Valley Hospital here in Midlands.
What is your educational background?
I got my bachelor's degree in biology from Georgia Tech, then went to UNC for my medical degree, and then a fellowship in medical toxicology and a residency in emergency medicine at Emory.
You mentioned medical toxicology. What is that?
Medical toxicology is the diagnosis, management, and prevention of poisoning, whether that's from medications, toxins, or other things that the body doesn't like.
And where have you worked in the past?
I've been in emergency rooms for nearly 2 decades now. I started out as just a physician at St. Joseph's Hospital, then a senior physician, and for the last 5, I've been the chief at River Valley Hospital.
Have you published anything in your field?
I have actually. I've written multiple articles about toxicology, including an article about common misdiagnoses in toxicology.
Now, let's focus to why we're here today. How did you become involved in this case?
On the morning of June 8th, 2019, I actually treated Genesis Petrillo.
When treating a patient, what method do you use?
I approach every case the same way. I try to understand a patient's symptoms and background, and then diagnose and treat any ailment that they might have.
Are these methods considered reliable in your field?
Yes, I've been treating patients in emergency rooms for nearly 20 years now, and the other doctors and I have all been using the same techniques.
What materials of this case did you review?
Well, in addition to all the firsthand knowledge I have of Genesis Petrillo's condition, I reviewed Angel Rodriguez's affidavit, toxicology reports, Genesis Petrillo's death certificate, and an analysis of a wine bottle recovered from Peony Estates.
Were these materials sufficient to reach your conclusion?
They were.
Did you reliably apply your methods to the facts and data of this case?
I did.
Now, let's focus on the day Genesis Petrillo came into the hospital. What happened when you first met Genesis Petrillo?
Genesis Petrillo came into the hospital with Angel Rodriguez. She was exhibiting symptoms of nausea. I learned that she had been drinking wine the night before, and I was able to corroborate that through her vomit.
What did you believe the diagnosis was initially?
Based on her initial symptoms, so there was nausea, slurred speech, and stomach pains, I initially thought that this was a case of alcohol poisoning. However, when I then conducted a full examination, I found multiple symptoms that were inconsistent with alcohol poisoning and was able to rule that out as a potential cause.
What was your response after you found all of these symptoms that are inconsistent with alcohol poisoning?
Well, I ordered both a toxicology report and a poisons and toxins analysis. I believed that Genesis Petrillo had ingested an organophosphate pesticide.
Now, what are organophosphate pesticides?
They're a class of insecticides that we normally use to kill insects, but they can also be deadly to humans if they get inside the bloodstream because they make the body stop producing an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase.
What does that chemical do?
Acetylcholinesterase, it allows the body to communicate with various muscles of the body, and without it, processes that are needed to keep the body alive, they stop functioning.
I want to talk more about this pesticide poison. How can you determine that someone has been exposed to this insecticide?
Doctors are able to use low acetylcholinesterase levels as a conclusive diagnosis of insecticide poisoning.
Were you able to find evidence of low amounts of that chemical?
I was, in Genesis Petrillo's toxicology report.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to reference pre-admitted Exhibit 5. May the plaintiff present this document on the screen?
You may.
Thank you. Mr. Kwan, Dr. Kwan, can you identify this document?
I can. This is Genesis Petrio's blood analysis that I ordered. And if you could go to the next slide. The acetylcholinesterase was flagged as low. And in fact, it was less than half of the minimum normal range.
Thank you. That's all I need for now. On the morning of June 8th, what happened to Genesis Petrio?
Well, soon after she was admitted, I had given her an antidote for insecticide poisoning. But by that point, the insecticide had been in her body for too long, and she died at 9:27 a.m. I reported that her cause of death was respiratory failure due to organophosphate poisoning. The next step was to determine how Genesis Petrio got insecticides into her system.
You said earlier that the insecticides are deadly if they enter the bloodstream. How can insecticide enter the bloodstream?
There are 3 different pathways that insecticides can use to enter the body. They can be absorbed through the skin, they can be inhaled in the air, or they can be ingested orally.
Did you find which pathway most likely resulted in this case?
Yes, I found, based on the progression of Genesis Petrio's symptoms, that oral ingestion was the likely pathway.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation. May I be heard?
You may.
So, as opposing counsel just stated and Dr. Kwan just testified to, there are 3 ways that pesticides can enter the body. When claiming that he found out that oral ingestion was the method, the only foundation that Dr. Kwan laid was the progression of symptoms. We merely asked that he lay more foundation to actually illustrate how the progression of symptoms shows us that it must be entered orally or digested orally rather than coming in contact with the, if I may proffer, Your Honor? Yeah.
Go for it.
Rather than coming in contact with the skin, for example, or being inhaled. There's simply no foundation to make that claim right now. We merely ask that opposing counsel lay that foundation before claiming that Dr. Kwan can know that it was ingested orally.
Your Honor, if I may proffer.
You may.
The foundation is laid in his expert opinion. If the defense wants to counter this point that Dr. Kwan is about to make, they should save that point for their cross-examination.
Can I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
No, there's no need. I tend to agree with the defense on this. Foundation has not been laid that it is definitively ingested rather through the air or through the skin. Lay a little bit more foundation as to the doctor's conclusions, and then you may continue with your examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, how were you able to determine which pathway likely occurred in this case?
Sure, I was able to rule out skin absorption through examining her skin. There were no rashes or any visible signs that the pesticide had absorbed through the skin. And based on the order in which symptoms appeared and the time frame it took for those symptoms to appear, I was also able to rule out inhalation. So that only left oral ingestion.
So just to make it clear for the jury, oral ingestion is proved to be the most likely pathway that occurred in this case. Correct.
Yes, I found based on this.
Leading question, may I be heard?
There's no need. It is a leading question. Please rephrase the question, Counselor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Apologies for that. So, Dr. Kwan, which is the most likely pathway that occurred in this case?
The most likely pathway was oral ingestion.
Were you able to determine how Genesis Petrio ingested the poison?
I found that the most likely cause was the wine that she consumed, and that was based on a laboratory report that I received.
At this time, Your Honor, I would like to reference a pre-admitted Exhibit 10. May the plaintiff share this document on the screen?
You may.
Thank you. Can you identify this document?
Yes, this is a toxicology report for a bottle of Cara wine. I learned from Angel Rodriguez that Genesis Petrio had been given a bottle of Cara the night before that she drank at her wedding rehearsal.
Did anything stand out to you from this document?
It did. If you could go to the next slide. There were high levels of isofenfos present in this bottle. And isofenfos, that's just the chemical name of the insecticide. So this would mean that insecticides were present in the bottle. I also found evidence of isofenfos in Genesis Petrio's toxins analysis.
At this time, Your Honor, I would like to reference pre-admitted Exhibit 6. May the plaintiff share that document on the screen?
You may.
Thank you. Can you identify this document, Dr. Kwan?
Yes, this is the poisons and toxins analysis for Genesis Petrillo.
Now, what does this analysis show you?
Well, if you go to the next slide, I found that isofenphos were present in both Genesis Petrillo's stomach and blood, just like in the bottle of Cara that was recovered at Peony Estates.
Thank you. That's all I need. Dr. Kwan, were you able to make a conclusion about Genesis Petrillo's cause of death?
Yes, I concluded to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that on the evening of June 7th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo consumed wine contaminated with an insecticide, which then led to the respiratory failure that directly caused her death.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor. Defense, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, is there any way opposing counsel can share some of the exhibits that they were just sharing with the members of the jury? They seem to have it queued up, and currently my screen sharing is being a little glitchy, so it would be a huge help.
How about we do this? When you need an exhibit, ask opposing counsel to present it, because technically this stuff would be before the court anyway, and they'll just pull it up for you. How's that sound?
It sounds great. Yes, Your Honor.
Plaintiff, do you understand the instructions?
Yes, the screen share understands.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You may proceed.
Can opposing counsel bring up Exhibit 10, please? I also asked that this time not be started, like counted towards the cross-examination, Your Honor. The pulling up the exhibits.
Understood. Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Doctor. Can you see and hear me all right?
I can.
Will you let me know if that changes at any point in today's trial?
I will.
I want to start by talking about Exhibit 10. This is the analysis of the Cara bottle of wine, correct?
That's right.
You'd agree with me that this analysis doesn't come from inside Ms. Petrillo's system. This is merely the contents found in the bottle, correct?
No, there was a separate analysis that was done for the wine and stomach contents.
Exactly, Doctor. But this itself, what we're looking at currently, that's for that bottle of wine when it was found later, correct?
That's right.
You'd agree with me at the bottom of this exhibit, it states that the sample was collected June 9th from the inside of an empty bottle of Cara wine found in the trash, correct?
That's correct.
And you'd agree with me that Ms. Petrillo had been drinking on the night of June 7th, correct?
Yes.
So this is 2 days after she had been drinking from that bottle of wine, correct?
Yes.
Now, Doctor, excuse me, Your Honor, opposing counsel will bring up Exhibit 6. That would be a huge help.
Opposing counsel?
Perfect. Okay, so Doctor, on the night in question, you conducted a few tests on Ms. Petrillo, correct?
Yes, there was this poisons and toxins analysis and then another toxicology report.
And at the end of that, you found out that there were organophosphate pesticides in her system. Isn't that right?
That's right.
Well, you'd agree with me that nowhere in the stomach contents can you give us a number as to how much pesticide she had in her system, right?
No, I can't conclude the amount of pesticides, only that it was enough to lead to her death.
But Doctor, that's yes to my question. In the stomach contents analysis, it doesn't give us a number as to how much she had?
No.
It doesn't tell us a number in the blood analysis either, right?
No, there's actually no way to tell the exact concentration. That's why we use other things like the acetylcholinesterase.
Exactly, Doctor. I actually want to touch on acetylcholinesterase. You'd agree with me that acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme that's naturally produced in the body, right?
That's right.
It's produced in all of us here today, correct?
Yes.
And all that you can tell us is that the acetylcholinesterase level was low, correct?
Well, that it was half of the minimum normal range, so low, yes.
But you can't give us conclusive evidence as to the amount of organophosphate pesticide that would have resulted in that, correct?
No, there's not an exact correlation between the low levels and the concentration of pesticides, and the concentration itself isn't really all that relevant.
But the amount, Doctor. So overall, you can't tell us at all how much organophosphate pesticide itself.
Objection, asked and answered.
May I respond, Your Honor?
No, that's not necessary. The court understands your point. Let's move on to the next question at this time.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Doctor, I want to ask you about the night of the 7th, just to clarify for members of the jury, you weren't at Peony Estates, right?
No, I was at the hospital.
You don't know how Peony Estates handles their wine?
I don't.
And you don't know how they store their pesticides, do you, doctor?
I do not.
Now, doctor, your position is that any amount of organophosphate pesticide can be deadly. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you base that on your experiences, right?
Yes, or because it disrupts the acetylcholinesterase, just a little bit of that organophosphate poison in your body is enough to disrupt general bodily functions.
But doctor, nowhere in your report or any of the documents that you have today do you cite any peer-reviewed journal that states that fact, correct?
States which fact? That
The
organophosphates are deadly?
No, doctor, that corroborates the fact that any amount of organophosphate pesticide can be deadly.
No, I don't cite any specifically. It's in the medical literature.
But here today, in your report and all the documents that you brought to trial, you don't state that fact anywhere, correct?
Objection, asked and answered again.
Your Honor, I'm merely getting a yes or no from the witness as to the question. I'm not re-asking the question, Your Honor. I'm merely tying the witness down to a yes or no answer.
I understand, Counselor. This one was close enough. I am going to sustain it. I think you got the best answer you'll get from the witness on this one.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, doctor, I want to talk about you for a quick second. You'd agree with me that when you first diagnosed Ms. Petrillo, it was alcohol poisoning, correct?
Well, based on the few initial symptoms that I had, yes.
And then you later changed your diagnosis to organophosphate pesticide poisoning, correct?
Yes, and that's because I was able to rule out alcohol poisoning because there were a number of symptoms that were absolutely inconsistent with that cause.
Now, doctor, you're on the board of Doctors for Organic Solutions, isn't that right?
I am.
And that's an organization that advocates against the use of chemical pesticides, right?
That's right.
And you're actually hoping that today's case will convince legislators to ban or curtail the amount of pesticides being used, right?
Yes, every death from organophosphate pesticides is preventable.
But you're not on any organization related to alcohol education or advocacy, right?
No.
I want to talk about Ms. Petrillo when she first walked into your ER, right? She was stumbling, correct?
Yes.
She was struggling to speak to you?
Yes.
She felt nauseated?
That's right.
She was throwing up?
Yes.
Her speech was slurred?
Yes.
She appeared intoxicated, right?
Yes, some of the early symptoms of organophosphate pesticides can replicate intoxication.
When you mentioned on direct examination that you had a chance to look at her vomit, correct?
I did.
It was deep red in color?
Yes.
It smelled alcoholic?
I did.
Now, you'd agree with me, doctor, that those symptoms, vomiting, slurred speech, stomach pain, in that moment, they're very consistent with a diagnosis of alcohol poisoning. Isn't that right?
Yes, only those initial symptoms were.
So then you conducted a blood alcohol concentration test, correct? Blood test?
Yes. Yes, I did.
And you found that amount to be 0.16%. Is that not right?
That was her blood alcohol concentration, yes.
Now, you'd agree with me that that amount is measured at the time the blood is drawn, correct?
It is.
And that was 3 a.m, right?
Around then, yeah.
And there's no way to know definitively what her BAC level would have been earlier in the night, right?
No, I can't give an exact number.
So when you first admitted Ms. Petrillo into your care, you were treating the case like an alcohol poisoning case, correct?
Well, until I actually conducted a full examination, yes, because those were the initial symptoms.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this point, I have no further questions.
Thank you, defense. Plaintiff, do you have any redirect?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Dr. Kwan, does your connection to the Doctors for Organic Solutions have any effect on the conclusions you have made?
No, it does not.
Why did you change your diagnosis from alcohol poisoning to pesticide poisoning?
Well, when I continued my analysis, I found these symptoms that were inconsistent with alcohol poisoning. So that included severely contracted pupils, that included that there were involuntary muscle twitches, and then a slowed pulse. All of these symptoms would not occur if this was just a case of alcohol poisoning.
All right. Thank you so much. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Is there any recross at this time?
There's no recross, Your Honor.
Thank you. Doctor, you may step down. Plaintiff, I assume you have no more witnesses to call at this time?
We call no more witnesses at this time, Your Honor.
Excellent. In that case, if the plaintiff rests, let's take a 5-minute break. Everybody be back here by 12:35 and we'll move on to the defense if they have any evidence to show today. Okay, it's 12:35. Real quick, let me make sure my scoring judge is here. Could you give us a shout out? Okay, looks like he's back. Could one member of both the defense and the plaintiff team just let us know that your people are back and ready to go? Or at least
We're
for
ready
the...
to go. The plaintiff's ready to go, Your Honor.
Ready to go? Okay. Defense?
Ready to go, Your Honor.
Thank you. In that case, the plaintiff rests its case in chief. Defense, you may call your first witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Austin Lewis to the stand.
Mr. Lewis, I remind you, of course, that you have been sworn in. And counselor, you may proceed at your leisure.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lewis. Could you introduce yourself for the members of the jury?
My name is Austin Lewis.
Mr. Lewis, what do you do for a living?
Well, I make wine, if that wasn't obvious already. But more specifically, I'm the head of wine production over at Peony Estates. I worked there over with Harper Martini. Before that, I worked over at Rosie and Pedro with that Francasio guy, the owner.
What exactly is your role at Peony Estates?
Well, Harper and I are the two main managers of Peony. While she's the owner, we're the managers. Right? Well, Harper's got all this business stuff going around, right? She's got the 2 to 3 tours a week. She's got a bed and breakfast, all that jazz. I head wine production. That includes growing, harvesting, fermentation, aging, and bottling. You know the deal.
Why wine, Mr. Lewis?
Oh, I love wine. My dear mother, she used to work over at Rosie and Pedro before I did. She would bring me there and she would show me all the ropes and everything. It gives me a real sense of family, you know. It's a great feeling to be able to do what my mother used to do, and I want to get my daughter into the business.
Now, how exactly do you make wine?
Oh, okay. Everybody, I don't really know how this call thingy works, but everybody here, listen up. You're about to get a crash course from yours truly. First, you grow the grapes. I've seen some people try and buy grapes from the store for wine, and I will throw up. What?
If I may proffer, I don't see the relevance in the process of growing grapes.
Your Honor, if I may.
Hold up, counselor. I'm sorry. I didn't hear the initial objection. I assume it was relevance?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Counselor, you may respond.
Your Honor, this testimony is relevant for multiple reasons. For one, it's foundational to the witness's credibility as a winemaker and his credibility to be testifying today as the head winemaker of Peony Estates. For another, we're here because there were pesticides in a wine bottle. Mr. Lewis is going to take us through the process of making wine and how the pesticides are used around the wine bottles. Therefore, this testimony is very relevant to today's trial and is admissible.
I see, counselor. Okay. In that case, I'm going to overrule the objection for now. If it does not seem to be going anywhere towards the burden in today's case, counselor, or any of the charges, you can re-raise your objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Or excuse me, complaint. They're not charges. So.
Mr. Lewis, can you take us through how exactly one makes wine?
All right, yeah, like I was saying, buckle up. You're about to get a crash course. First, you grow the grapes. If you go to a store and buy the grapes, I will throw up. Once the grapes are ripe, you cut them off and you press them and you put them in a vat to ferment. Once they're out of the vat and they're fermented, you have to peel the grapes. You have to peel the grape skins away from the juice. If you don't do that, you will throw up when you drink your wine. Once you got those grape skins away, you put them in wooden barrels to age. Peony Estates usually does 1 year, but you can do whatever you want. But after that, boom, you've got your wine.
Now, you've told us how you make wine, but how does Peony Estates make wine through this process?
Of course. The key to wine at Peony Estates is the slope that we've got in the back. This baby faces southwest. So for us northern hemisphere folks, that means he gets the maximum amount of sunlight per day, which means the grapes grow faster and they've got more of a kick to them. You pair that with the 1 year aging process I mentioned before, and you've got wine that is patented to feel it. When you taste this, you will get a kick. Trust me.
Mr. Lewis, does Harper handle any of the wine side of the business?
Not really. While Harper will come by every once in a while to make sure the books balance out, she more or less just lets me, do what I do best, make wine.
How exactly did you come to know Harper?
Well, she and I used to work with each other over when we worked for Francasio. I'll say I hate Francasio to guts, but he made a good choice when he made Harper a manager. Harper is a real head for business.
Now, what exactly makes you say this?
Well, for one, Harper had the bright idea to stop working for Francasio and start her own wine business. Better yet, she took me with her, so I gotta give her credit for that. Francasio wasn't too happy that we were leaving and taking a lot of his staff with him, but he's got what's coming to him. That man fired my mother from the job. So.
Well, it's clear that you disliked how Francasio ran his business, but what did you think of your new boss?
Oh, Harper, she's leagues better. So we've got our disagreements every once in a while, but that's part of how the business runs. I come at it from the fact that I need to make the best wine possible for Peony. Harper comes from the fact that we need to run a business and we can't go under. So when these viewpoints differ, we hash it out and we come to compromises. That's how business works. She's really good at this stuff.
Did you happen to know Casey very well?
Oh, of course. Harper would always bring Casey over. I've already told you what family means in the wine business for me. So seeing Harper bring over her son like that, it really warmed my heart. It's clear Harper loves Casey to guts. That's why I'm so mad about all these accusations I'm hearing.
Well, let's talk about that then. What exactly do you know about these accusations?
Well, I know that a lot of them are based off of this wine bottle that was found in the dumpster that tested positive for some isofenfos techno gadget babble stuff I don't understand. But I've got a pretty big problem with that.
What exactly is this problem you have with that?
Well, I know that a couple of days before the wedding, I myself put a bunch of extra pesticide and I dumped it in that same dumpster. It doesn't take an expert to tell you how a wine bottle next to pesticide got contaminated with pesticide.
Well, Mr. Lewis, how do you know that the wine bottle was in the same dumpster as you had these pesticide containers in?
Well, I know that a couple of days prior, like I mentioned, we had to deal with a bit of an infestation. Now, again, to be safe, I bought a lot of pesticide so we could spray the entire place down and keep everything safe. We ended up having a little bit of extra pesticide. Again, to keep things safe, I threw out all that extra pesticide. I know it's in that same dumpster because Peony only has one dumpster. Like, this isn't a garbage disposal, it's a winery.
Mr. Lewis, would it have been odd to you if Harper was seen handling a pesticide container on the night of the wedding rehearsal?
Oh, of course not. You kidding? I mentioned the infestation already. Seeing Harper walking around with pesticide tells you it's Tuesday. I even saw a cockroach or two going around there a couple of days prior.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Plaintiff, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Are you ready?
You may proceed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You met the defendant in 2012, correct?
Yeah, when we were working over for Francasio.
And the two of you became close friends?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, she's a good business person and a good friend.
And the defendant offered you your job at Peony Estates in January of 2015.
Yeah, she let me know that she was planning on branching away from Rosie and Pedro.
And your position at Peony Estates is as head winemaker.
Yep, and I'm proud of that position.
I'd like to turn to your experiences at Peony Estates. Your responsibilities included growing and bottling, among others?
Yep, it's growing, harvesting, fermentation, aging, and bottling.
Thank you. The location of Peony Estates is bordering a swamp. Is this correct?
Yeah, the Sullivan Swamp. It causes a lot of problems for us, honestly.
Such include a major pest problem.
Yeah, that's a big part of why we're having that pesticide, like we need all that pesticide for the infestation I mentioned earlier.
So Peony Estates started using chemical pesticides in October of 2015,
Yeah.
and you continue to do so today, correct?
Yep.
In 2018, Peony Estates had an infestation in the wine cave,
Yeah, we did. It was very hard to get that out, let me tell you.
the bottling area as well.
Yeah.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance.
Counselor, do you have a response?
May I proffer? The relevance of this testimony is that there are pesticides involved in the death of Genesis Petrillo. So,
If I may respond based on those grounds.
You may.
Your Honor, this current the current questions that opposing counsel are asking are referring to 2018. Now, Genesis Petrillo's death occurred on June 8th of 2019. So whatever they were doing with pesticide bottles back in 2018 has nothing to do with the pesticide that is in question of today's trial. Therefore, this testimony is irrelevant.
Counselor, I'm going to give you a last chance to respond here.
yes, my testimony, the testimony would continue on to show that the aging process for the wine at Peony Estates takes approximately 1 year, and the use of pesticides in 2018 would directly lead to any sort of contamination in a 2019 wine, such as the Cara.
Your Honor, may I respond based on those grounds?
Actually, you may. That just opened up a whole new can of worms. Go for it.
Your Honor, what opposing counsel seems to be getting at is more of a negligence claim. If I may direct you to your case documents, Peony Estates has been cleared of any negligence charges. This case is going after battery. Specifically, the opposing counsel has to prove that Harper Martini placed pesticides intentionally into the single bottle of Cara wine. Whatever they were doing with pesticides back in 2018 and any contamination that may have accidentally occurred is a negligence claim, which is not being discussed in today's trial. Therefore, this line of questioning is irrelevant and is inadmissible.
I fully agree, Counselor. I'm going to strike the testimony. Anything referencing pesticides prior to the death was in 2019, correct?
Correct.
Yes, June 8th, 2018.
Any reference to pesticides prior to 2019 is stricken from the record, and I encourage plaintiff counsel to move on from this line of questioning.
Thank you, Your Honor. Let's move on to today's case. You observed that the defendant and Miss Petrillo did not get along.
Yeah, Harper would tell me a lot of stuff. It's pretty funny in-law stuff. But in all fairness, I've never heard of an in-law that got along with the other side. You know what I'm saying?
And the defendant has had firsthand experience with the dangers of pesticides.
Oh yeah, we had an incident with one of our employees, Kirby Doolittle. I'm only laughing because he ended up being all right in the end.
And this is because Kirby Doolittle drank contaminated wine.
Yeah, Kirby, I love Kirby. He's amazing. He's got a heart of gold, but he's kind of a moron. The dude just drank a full bottle that was like present in the bottling area while we were doing a spray.
So the wine was contaminated with pesticides.
Yeah, the wine was contaminated, and Kirby like immediately started throwing up. We took care of everything immediately. We made sure to take him to the hospital. Everything was fine, and that's, again, like I said, that's the only reason I'm laughing. But just goes to show that this stuff, it acts pretty quick.
Regardless, the contaminated wine nearly killed the employee, correct?
Yes,
Objection,
of course. Thank you.
Objection, Your Honor, to improper opinion. Mr. Lewis is not a doctor and cannot state whether the amount of pesticide that Kirby consumed would have actually killed him or not. Therefore, this is inadmissible.
Counselor, response?
I can just move on.
Okay, in that case, it's stricken from the record. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. So there are allegations that contaminated wine is what killed Miss Petrillo, correct?
Yeah, I'm well aware of the stupidity of those allegations.
And the wine in question is the Cara brand?
Yeah.
And there aren't any occasions where pesticides have leaked or spilled at Peony Estates?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? The headphones like to mess up every once in a while.
There aren't any occasions where pesticides have leaked or spilled at Peony Estates?
No.
And you've never sold any contaminated wine to customers?
Of course not. That's how you get taken out of business.
And just to be very clear, there were no pesticides present in any wines in 2018?
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance again. This is testimony is going back to the 2018 wine and pesticide contamination that may have occurred then, which again is a negligence issue, which Peony Estate's already been cleared of.
I agree, Counselor. Under my previous ruling, this testimony is not admissible.
Understood, Your Honor. No further questions.
Is there any redirect?
No, Your Honor. We just asked that Mr. Lewis be allowed to step down.
All right, Mr. Lewis, you are excused. Defense, you can call your next witness. Give us just a moment to finish up scoring here.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Dr. Cannon to the stand. Just let us know when you're ready to go.
Will do. Thank you. My fellow judge, are you all set?
Ready for the next witness.
Excellent. Counselor, you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Doctor. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, my name is Dr. Ryan Cannon.
What do you do for a living, Dr. Cannon?
I'm a medical doctor currently working as a medical consultant.
What is a medical consultant?
Essentially, medical consultants are hired to conduct a after-death review impartially. We look at documents and medical history that's relevant to the case and make an informed conclusion.
Now, Doctor, before we come to your conclusions, I'd like to give the members of the jury some background on you. Where'd you go to school?
I got my Bachelor's of Science from the Ohio State University. Then I graduated from Harvard Medical School with my MD.
Did you become a consultant right out of college?
No, I had a focus on toxicology and pharmacology while at Harvard, so I worked in those fields, but I became the chief toxicologist at Massachusetts General Hospital up in Boston. Then I taught at Midlands Medical School, and I'm now working as a medical consultant.
Now, in regards to today's case, what materials did you review in preparation for trial?
So I had access to everything that Dr. Kwan had for his conclusions, including the certificate of death, lab reports, an alcohol impairment chart, as well as Dr. Kwan's report and the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez.
Did you get to examine Ms. Petrillo's body?
No, I didn't. Unfortunately for me, her body was already cremated after I was hired. However, this isn't a problem. Medical consultants rarely get to examine the body.
So without the body, Doctor, did you have sufficient facts and data to come to your conclusion today?
Yes, I did. As I mentioned, Dr. Kwan's reports, the lab results, Ms. Rodriguez's statements were more than enough to come to my conclusions.
And Doctor, as a medical consultant, what is the process you use to assess all the information that you're given?
So medical consultants use a process called comparative analysis. We look at the facts and information provided in the case and we compare it to past cases that we've been a part of to come to our conclusions.
Is that a reliable method, Doctor?
Yes, over the past couple decades, this has been the industry standard.
Is it peer-reviewed and tested?
Yes, of course.
And did you reliably apply comparative analysis to today's case?
Yes, I did, as always.
Doctor, I'd like to now talk about your conclusions. But before doing so, can you refresh the members of the jury on what Dr. Kwan concluded the cause of Ms. Petrillo's death was?
Dr. Kwan believed that the cause of Ms. Petrillo's death was originally from organophosphate poisoning.
Doctor, do you agree with that conclusion?
Well, yes and no. I think Dr. Kwan's conclusions are possible, but I don't think we have enough evidence presented to us to come to a conclusion based on any degree of scientific certainty.
Why do you say that, Doctor?
Well, in my report, I noted 4 possibilities of how Ms. Petrillo could have passed, 2 of which I'd like to emphasize. One was the dosage of organophosphate in the wine and the amount of alcohol that was in Ms. Petrillo's system on the night in question.
All right, Doctor, I'd like to break that down for members of the jury. Let's start with the organophosphate pesticide. In cases involving a poison, how do you determine the cause of death?
So in toxicology, the best way to determine cause of death is to first find out what dosage of the poison must be consumed to cause death, and then compare it with the amount the person actually consumed.
So why is dosage so important when talking about a poison?
Well, dosage is everything when talking about poison. At the right dosage, anything can become poisonous. Take water, for instance. It's necessary for us to live, but too much of it in your system can be fatal. It's like what I used to teach my students at Midlands Medical School. The dosage makes the poison.
And so how does dosage apply to today's case?
Well, the possible poison in this case is isofenfos, which is an organophosphate pesticide. So we need to find out what dosage of isofenfos causes death, and then we need to figure out how much isofenfos Petrillo had consumed.
Do you know what dosage of isofenfos causes death?
Frankly, I don't know. Dr. Kwan doesn't mention any peer-reviewed studies that give an exact number for dosage.
Did Dr. Kwan know how much isofenfos Ms. Petrillo had consumed?
Unfortunately, no. Due to the type of test that Dr. Kwan used, we're only able to figure out that Ms. Petrillo had isofenfos in her system. Factoring in what I said about dosage earlier, this is the main problem with trying to figure out this diagnosis.
Earlier this afternoon, Dr. Kwan told us that the concentration of isofenfos in the Cara bottle of wine when it was tested was 91 micrograms per liter. Does that prove that Ms. Petrillo was poisoned?
No, not exactly. This is not a dosage. This is a concentration.
What does that mean, Doctor?
Well, the Cara bottle of wine that was found in the dumpster was nearly 2 days after Miss Petrillo was drinking from it. So it's entirely possible, without knowing what else was in that dumpster, that there's the amount in the bottle. The amount of pesticide that was in the bottle wasn't as high as it was when it was found.
All right, Doctor. So is it possible for someone to medically test positive for isofenfos in their system without that causing their death?
Well, yeah, that is entirely possible. Since we don't know what dosage can be fatal, it's entirely possible that you could ingest a certain amount of isofenfos and still survive from it.
Doctor, if we were to find out during the course of today's trial that in that same dumpster as the wine bottle, there were bottles of pesticide also thrown away, how would that impact your analysis?
Well, this could change a lot. This means the real amount of isofenfos in the bottle when Ms. Petrillo consumed it could be entirely different from the empty bottle that was reported. It would make me believe that the bottle was contaminated.
All right, Doctor, I want to switch to your second area of concern that you mentioned, Ms. Petrillo's blood alcohol levels. First of all, what is blood alcohol concentration?
Blood alcohol concentration, or BAC as it's often referred to, is the measure of how much alcohol is in someone's system. Dr. Kwan mentions this as a possibility for cause of death, but he ultimately rules it out because Miss Petrillo's BAC was 0.16% when she was admitted into the hospital.
And so why is that number 0.16%? Why is that number important?
Well, a BAC of 0.16% isn't enough to be fatal. However, this is the BAC that was measured at 3 o'clock in the morning when the blood was drawn. BAC does not remain constant. When you drink, it spikes and then slowly decreases over time. So it's very likely that her BAC was a lot higher before or earlier in the night.
Is there any way to calculate what her BAC levels would have been earlier that night?
No, you really can't. Unless someone were to have drawn her blood at the rehearsal dinner, there's no way of telling how high her BAC was.
Dr. Cannon, could Ms. Petrillo's BAC have been high enough to cause her death?
Yes, it's a possibility that I can't rule out.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Counselor. Plaintiff, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Dr. Cannon, you reviewed Dr. Kwan's report, right?
Yes.
And you reviewed the testimony of Angel Rodriguez, right?
Yes.
But you haven't interviewed Dr. Kwan.
No, I haven't spoken to anyone that's involved in this case.
And you have never seen or directly analyzed the body of Genesis Petrillo.
No. Of
Let's
course,
talk-
that's not necessarily a problem. Medical consultants normally don't.
Well, let's talk about the conclusion you made from the materials that you had. You concluded that the facts surrounding Petrillo's death are consistent with organophosphate poisoning from the Caro wine, correct?
Yes.
I want to talk about one of the possible causes of death that you mentioned. Was Miss Petrillo's blood alcohol concentration level 0.16%?
At the time of the hospital when it was taken, yes.
But you don't know that it was anything else other than 0.16%.
No, I can infer that it was higher because she had been drinking earlier in the night, but I don't know exactly what that number would be.
But if she did suffer from alcohol poisoning, a BAC level of 0.16% would not lead to her death, correct?
No, not on its own.
And in fact, you never saw, in your whole professional career, you never seen a blood alcohol poisoning fatality with a BAC lower than 0.3%.
No, I have not.
So you would agree that the alcohol poisoning would not explain the presence of pesticides in Petrillo's body, right?
No, it would not.
Thank you. So let's talk about the conclusions that you have made after reviewing all the materials. We just talked about some of the theories that you discussed. Now, do you believe that respiratory arrest was the most likely cause of Genesis Petrillo's death?
Yes, I do. And Dr. Kwan also concluded that as well.
And that respiratory arrest was most likely caused by organophosphate pesticide poisoning?
Yes, I would consider that the most likely. However, with any medical certainty, I can't conclude that that is the one diagnosis.
However, Dr. Cannon, you also think that it's more likely than not that that wine produced at the Peony Estates that was produced by the defendant is the most likely cause of poisoning.
I would say that it's the most likely out of the four. Yeah.
Let's talk about why you're on the stand here today. Dr. Cannon, isn't it true that you are an associate consultant for Garner Consulting?
Yes, I am.
One of Garner's clients is Detsky, Roach, and Rodent Killers, right?
Correct.
And they are one of your biggest clients, right?
Yes, they are.
The CEO of Detsky, Roach, and Rodent Killers.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance, may I be heard?
Yes.
If I may proffer, I believe opposing counsel is asking this line of questioning to go towards a bias pocket. However, given the fact that we're here to discuss a battery charge and that Peony Estates was dropped of all negligence charges relating to the use of pesticides, this line of questioning doesn't make any fact of consequence as to whether or not Miss Martini poisoned that car bottle of wine any more or less likely, and therefore it's clearly relevant, Your Honor.
Your Honor, if I may proffer.
You may, yes.
Bias is always relevant, even in an expert testimony, even in this case. Bias, my line of questioning will demonstrate that Dr. Cannon had a bias for why he's testifying the way he is today on the stand. And I believe I should continue it.
Can I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
Well, no, I'd like to go back to counsel here for a moment. Bias is not always relevant. People can have biases towards things that have nothing to do with today's case. So if this is a bias towards Peony Estates, can you show that this is a bias towards Harper Martini as well?
Well, I'm not addressing the fact that this is a bias towards Peony Estates per se. I'm addressing to how his bias could have determined what medical conclusions he made based on the materials he reviewed.
Can I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
Let's give her a little bit of leeway, counselor. In a couple of questions, if you don't think she has tied it up nicely and somehow brought it back to a point, please re-raise your objection.
Yes, Your
I'm
Honor.
going to give her a little bit of leeway here.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
The CEO of Detsky, Roach, and Rodent Killer is a man named Eli Harrison, right?
Yes.
Eli Harrison personally told you that it is, quote, extremely important, quote, for you to testify today.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay? May I be heard?
I understand how it's hearsay. Do you have a response?
I do, Your Honor.
Okay.
I believe I'm offering this to show that there was not on the truth of the matter asserted, but on the effect of the listener. The listener in this case being Dr. Cannon.
Can I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
You may respond, yeah.
In the statement itself regarding what the CEO of Detsky, Roach, Rodent Pesticides, excuse me, I don't know the name of the company, said to Dr. Cannon is an out-of-court statement being offered the truth of the matter asserted. In this case, the fact that that statement itself has to do with what Dr. Cannon then should do means that the truth value is inherent in the statement. The statement itself is self-serving on the basis of truth, and therefore they can't be offering it for the effect on the listener. They have to be offering it for the truth itself, Your Honor, and therefore it's still inadmissible in today's trial.
Final response, Counselor?
Yes, I believe that the effect on the listener goes to the witness' subsequent actions and their conclusions based on this case. And I believe that this line of questioning is extremely important to demonstrate how this statement had an effect on Dr. Cannon, and that's why he is saying the things he is saying today in court. I am not asserting any truth of the matter of what Eli Harrison specifically stated.
Counselor, I'm going to put a limiting instruction on this statement to only use it for the effect on the listener, and we'll let it in that regard.
Yes,
Re-raise, it appears to go to the truth of the matter, though.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I continue?
You may.
So Mr. Harrison told you that your testimony today was extremely important if you wanted to continue to have their business, correct?
Yeah, he is an important client. However, my testimony will always be objective and well supported.
But Dr. Cannon, you would agree with me that you don't want to lose Detsky as a client.
No, I do not.
And the outcome of this case could determine whether or not you continue working with one of your company's biggest clients, right?
It is possible. However, I don't. His statement doesn't have an influence on what I'm saying. I've been testifying in over 35 legal cases, and I've always testified for the defense. So I'd be doing this regardless.
But you would agree that if you lost Detsky as a client, your company would lose a lot of money as well, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered. May I be heard?
No, I'm going to give her a little bit of leeway on this one.
Yes, Your Honor.
Let's get a yes or no answer out of the witness for this.
Yes, Your Honor.
It is possible, yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Any redirect, Counselor?
Yes, Your Honor. Briefly.
Go for it.
Dr. Cannon, as you were just crossed about your allegiances to Garner Consulting and Detsky Pesticides, would you say your statements today in trial have been affected by those claims in any way, shape, or form?
No, I don't believe so. As I said before, my objections will always be objective and well supported.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Is there any recross on the very brief redirect?
No recross on that one question, Your Honor.
In that case, Doctor, you are excused. Defense, you can call your final witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Harper Martini to the stand.
Mrs. Martini, I remind you that you are sworn in today's testimony. Counselor, give us just a moment to wrap up scoring. And scoring judge, let me know when you're all set.
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
In that case, let's proceed.
Good afternoon. Please state your name for the court.
Harper Martini.
Ms. Martini, we've heard a lot of testimony today from a lot of people, but I want to give you the chance to explain yourself. Ms. Martini, did you ever put isofenfos in Peony Estates wine?
No.
Did you ever put isofenfos in Cara wine?
No, I didn't.
Ms. Martini, did you intentionally poison the wine that you gifted Genesis Petrillo?
No, I didn't.
Ms. Martini, who was Genesis Petrillo to you?
Genesis was the fiance to my only son, Casey.
Did you get along with Genesis?
No, unfortunately we didn't, and that's just because we got off on the wrong foot, and we just never got along after that.
How did you feel when you found out that your son and Genesis were engaged?
To be honest, I wasn't very happy about it, and I really hoped that as time went on, everything would just naturally fall apart. But we just kept getting further and further into the wedding planning.
Did you ever try to repair your relationship with Genesis?
Of course I did, multiple times. And I don't think it really worked because after one of my attempts, Genesis left me a drunk voicemail saying that she was going to move my son to France and not allow me to see my future grandkids.
Did you try to talk to Genesis about that?
Of course I did, and it just didn't work. So I figured I would just go through the universal language of money.
How did you go about that?
I wrote Genesis a note.
Ms. Martini, would you recognize a copy of that note if I were to show you today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to screen share Exhibit 24?
Has Exhibit 24 been entered?
It has not.
Okay, so proposed Exhibit 24 can be screen shared with the members of the jury. Go for it. Or excuse me, with the court. We'll see if we'll share this with the jury.
Thank you. Ms. Martini, please tell the jury what you're looking at.
This is the note that I wrote Genesis.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
It is.
Your Honor, the defense moves to put Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Objections?
There's no objection, Your Honor.
It is so admitted. You may proceed.
Ms. Martini, can you read the first 5 lines for us?
Yes, so it says, Genesis, it's come to this. The wedding can't happen. I need you out of our lives. Leave Casey and then close $300,000 is yours.
Did Genesis accept the money?
He did take the money, but he still stayed.
Ms. Martini, this note also says, otherwise I will take you out of the picture the hard way. Am I right?
Yes, that is true.
What did you mean by that?
I was just simply going to tell Casey that Genesis was in love with someone else. That way, Casey would leave her.
Ms. Martini, earlier today, we heard Ms. Arnold testify to a statement you made about making Genesis disappear. What did you mean by that statement?
I was simply referring to what I was saying, that I was going to tell Casey that Genesis was in love with somebody else.
Why didn't you tell Casey this?
I love my son so much, and I wouldn't want to be the one to break his heart. So I decided not to go with that plan, especially because I told him that I'd make peace with Genesis.
How were you going to make peace with Genesis?
At the wedding rehearsal dinner, I was going to offer Genesis this beautiful blend of wine that I'd been preparing along with Casey for about a year or so. Casey had called it Cara.
Ms. Martini, earlier today, we also heard Ms. Arnold testify about this bottle. Now, why was it so important that it be kept separate from everything else?
Okay, so I don't really get involved in much of the wine production anymore, but Cara was just my special little project. It had to be separate from the other bottles just to stay at the right temperature so it can age and ferment perfectly.
Now, Ms. Arnold also testified about a canister of pesticide she saw you carrying. Why was that pesticide canister there?
We had just finished spraying one of our areas, so that's why it was there. An employee must have simply forgot to put it away.
Let's go back to your plan to make peace with Genesis. What happened after you gave Genesis the bottle of Cara wine?
After I gave Genesis the bottle, I looked over at Casey and she had this bright smile on his face, and I just knew that I had done the right thing. After that, I just felt content enough to leave the wedding dinner and go to get some rest.
What happened after you left the dinner?
About 1 a.m. or so, I got a call from Austin Lewis that someone from my estate had been rushed to the hospital.
What did you do after you received that call?
At that point, I decided it was probably a good idea to go check on Genesis to make sure she hadn't done anything risky before the wedding.
What happened when you went to check on Genesis?
When I went to her room, she wasn't there, but what was there was that bottle of Cara that I had gifted her just laying on the floor. I just picked it up, took the wrapper off, and threw it in the trash.
Now, Ms. Martini, earlier today, we also heard testimony from Ms. Rodriguez, who testified that she ran into you in the hallway that morning. Did that happen? Did you run into Ms. Rodriguez in the hallway?
No, I didn't. I never saw her in the hallway that morning.
Where were you that morning?
I was in Casey's room, and that's where Angel came and told us that Genesis had fallen into a coma.
So did you ever tell Ms. Rodriguez that Genesis was poisoned and you would have to cancel the wedding?
No, I never said that.
Ms. Martini, when Ms. Rodriguez entered the room, did she appear drunk at all?
Yes, she did appear drunk.
Ms. Martini, are you aware that a bottle of Cara was found in a Peony Estates dumpster with pesticide canisters on the morning of June 9th?
Yes, I have been made aware of that.
Why were the pesticide canisters there?
We had, like I said, we just finished spraying our bottling area, and we have the one big dumpster where we throw everything away, and that's where we put those pesticide canisters in.
Ms. Martini, is it possible that the presence of those canisters could have contaminated the bottle of Cara wine?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Please elaborate.
Your Honor, opposing counsel just asked this witness whether or not it was possible that the pesticides in a dumpster contaminated wine that was also in a dumpster. Ms. Martini wasn't there when that wine was dumped or when those pesticides were dumped. She wasn't there for the 3-day span that they were in the same dumpster. She has no idea. She has no personal knowledge to say any of that or to even answer that question.
Counselor, are you objecting under 602 or 701?
701. I guess 602.
602.
Yeah, excuse me.
Response, Counselor?
Yes, Your Honor. This is not speculation. As a lay witness, Ms. Martini is more than welcome to give her rationally based perception of what happened. As someone who works at Peony Estates with pesticides regularly, we have already laid the foundation that all of the trash goes to this dumpster. She is more than welcome to testify to her opinion of what happened. Therefore, this is not speculation.
May I be heard?
No, I'm going to sustain the objection. This does seem to stray into the realm of speculation. The jury can draw their own conclusions from it. So,
Motion to strike that testimony.
I'm only going to strike the
question.
Everything before that is fine, I think. Just the question where she asks, is it possible? Everything else is stricken.
Thank you.
Or, excuse me, that's the only thing stricken. There we go.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Martini, let's talk about what happened the morning after you received the call from Austin Lewis. Did you go with Casey and Ms. Rodriguez to the hospital?
No, I didn't. I didn't go with them. At that point, we had already had guests arriving at the estate, so I figured my time would be better served just getting all those people under control.
Ms. Martini, has Peony Estates been affected by this tragedy?
We definitely have been affected very negatively. A lot of people have dropped their reservations because they're waiting on the outcome of this case. My biggest fear is that I'll no longer be able to pay.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation. May I be heard?
You may.
This is under Rule 701.
Okay.
Your Honor, the witness just said that a lot of people were dropping their reservations because they were waiting for the outcome of this case. This witness has no way of knowing why those people have dropped their reservations, and for her to say that goes outside of the scope of her rationally based perceptions, and it's speculation as a result.
Response, Counselor?
I disagree with opposing counsel's idea that this does not fall under the defendant's rationally based perception. She is the owner of a very successful winery. This is a case that would have a huge impact on her business. She has personally experienced the loss in revenue and clients that have been related to this case. I don't think it's a stretch to say that this is well within her rationally based perception to answer this way.
May I be heard?
No, that's not necessary. At the moment, this is speculation. You can try and lay the foundation that, for instance, some of her customers told her that that is why they are dropping their reservation. But at the moment, this is speculation.
And motion to strike that testimony.
It is stricken, yes.
Your Honor, within the time constraints, I'll move on.
Okay.
Ms. Martini, has your relationship with your son been impacted at all?
Yes, definitely been impacted. I wouldn't even say we have a relationship at all. I lose my husband. Now I'm in the process of losing my business and the relationship with Casey.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense has no further questions.
Cross-examination, Counselor?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed when ready.
And Your Honor, just before I begin, I'd like to let the court know that I'm going to be referencing what's already in evidence as Exhibit 24 over the course of this cross-examination.
Will you be pulling it up at any time?
Yeah, I'll ask my co-counsel, Ms. Sikowski, to put that up for me.
Sounds good. You may proceed.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Casey Soto's your child, right?
Yes, that's my son.
Casey Soto's your only child.
Yes,
You love Casey, don't you?
of course.
You love Casey so much that you hope to pass on your winery business to her.
Yes, as every mother would want to do their child.
That winery is called Peony Estates, right?
Yes, that is true.
In your opinion, Casey's life was at Peony Estates, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Your only wish for Casey was for Casey to take over Peony Estates from you when you retire.
Of course, as every mother would just want her child to be successful.
Let's move on to your relationship with her fiance, with his fiance, Genesis Petrillo. You wish that Miss Petrillo had never met Casey. Am I right?
Yes, that is true. I did not like Genesis and didn't think that she was a good influence on my son.
That's right, ma'am. You thought that Miss Petrillo was a bad influence on Casey, right?
Yes, I agree.
Miss Petrillo and Casey dated for about 5 years before they decided to get married, right?
Yes.
When they decided to get married, you weren't happy about that at all, were you?
No, I wasn't. I just thought Genesis led Casey into risky behavior that just wasn't safe for him.
You thought that Miss Petrillo did nothing but to try and further divide you from Casey, right?
Yes, that is definitely true. Just like the voicemail that he left me saying that he was going to take Casey to France.
We'll get to that in a moment. I just want to talk about that a lunch date that you had with Miss Petrillo. You had one of those, right?
Yes, we did.
It was a few months before the wedding.
Yes.
During that, you wanted to bury the hatchet and patch things up with Miss Petrillo.
Yes, I did.
During that lunch, Miss Petrillo said something to you about a move, right?
Yes, she did.
She told you that she didn't think Casey was going to tell you about it.
Yes, she did say that.
You didn't find out what that meant until a few months later, right?
Yes.
A few months later, just before the wedding, you got a voicemail from Miss Petrillo, right?
Yes, I did.
In that voicemail, Miss Petrillo told you that after their wedding, she planned on moving to France with Casey.
Yes, she did say that in that drunk voicemail that she left me.
When you heard that, you were upset, right?
Of course, as every mother would if they heard from their child's fiance that they were moving.
Miss Petrillo told you that you would never see Casey again, didn't she?
Yes, she did make that threat to me.
Miss Petrillo even told you that you would never meet your grandchildren.
Exactly, she said that.
That made you upset too.
Yes, that did. I would love to see my grandkids in the future, and I realized that if they did move to France, I would lose that chance.
In that moment, you thought that Miss Petrillo was the biggest mistake in Casey's life, right?
Yes, I did. If Genesis was able to just disregard Casey's future, then I didn't think she was the right one for her.
That's a yes to my question. That in that moment, you thought that Miss Petrillo was the biggest mistake in Casey's life, right?
Yes, I did.
That was because you knew that if Casey was in France, she couldn't take over Peony Estates from you, right?
Yes, I did. Like I said, if Genesis was willing to just disregard Casey's future, then she wasn't the right one for him.
I want to talk about the things that you did in the weeks leading up to the wedding. You recognize a copy of a note that you gave to Miss Petrillo a week before the wedding, right?
I would.
Ms. Sikowski, could you put up Exhibit 24? And that's already been admitted into evidence. Can you see that all right, ma'am?
Yes, I can.
You recognize this as a copy of the note you wrote and gave to Genesis Petrillo, right?
Yes, that's the note.
You gave this note to Miss Petrillo at the end of May, right?
Yes, that is true.
That was about a week before the wedding.
Yes, about a week.
You wrote, "I need you out of our lives," right?
Yes, I did say that because I realized that if Casey was going to go through with marrying Genesis, then he was choosing her over me.
You wrote, I need you out of our lives.
Yes, I did.
You wrote, leave Casey and the enclosed $300,000 is yours. You wrote that,
Yes.
right?
Yes, I did write that.
You wrote, otherwise, I'll take you out of the picture the hard way, correct?
Yes, I did. And like I said earlier, I was simply going to tell Casey that Genesis was in love with somebody else.
You keep saying that you wanted to tell Casey about a love interest that his fiance might have had. You didn't write that on this note, did you?
No, I didn't, because I had full confidence that Genesis was going to accept the $300,000. I mean, it's $300,000. That's a huge amount of money.
Ma'am, that's a no to my question. You didn't write, I'm going to tell Casey that you're in love with someone else on this note.
No, I didn't put that on the note.
You didn't write, I'm going to tell Casey about an affair that you're having with someone else, did you?
No, I didn't, because like I said, I hoped it didn't have to get to that.
The sentence that you wrote was, otherwise, I'll take you out of the picture the hard way. That's
Objection,
what you
Your
wrote,
Honor.
isn't it?
If I may be heard, asked and answered. Ms. Martini
May I
has.
respond, Your Honor?
You may go for it.
I'm clarifying for the members of the jury that about the claims that Ms. Martini has made about this note. She said in her direct examination and a little bit earlier in my cross-examination that this note meant something completely different than what it says. I'm clarifying for the members of the jury that that might not be true because that's not what's written on the paper.
If I may respond on those grounds, Your Honor.
Very, very briefly.
Ms. Martini did already testify to the meaning of the note on direct. She has not changed the meaning of the note at all, simply explained it. And as you have already crossed on it, she has answered every single one of those times to your answers what she meant by the note. I believe we've already covered the question.
Your Honor, can I respond to that?
No, I'm going to overrule and encourage you to make your point, or encourage you to move on soon, excuse me, and also encourage the witness to stick to a yes and no as much as possible. But we will let it go at that.
Okay. Ma'am, I'll ask you one more time. You wrote, I will take you out of the picture the hard way, right?
Yes, I wrote that.
Thank you, Ms. Sikowski. You can take that down. But Ms. Petrillo didn't leave Casey, did she?
No, she took the money, but she didn't leave.
She went through with the wedding.
Yes.
I want to talk about what you did because of that. On your vineyard, you use pesticides to kill pests, right?
Yes, we do. We're located next to a swamp, so this is just something that we do to handle that.
Since you're the owner of that vineyard, you have unrestricted access to those pesticides, right?
Yes, I am, and I am also trained on how to handle these pesticides.
On the day of the wedding rehearsal, you gave Miss Petrillo a bottle of Cara wine, right?
Yes, I did give her a bottle of Cara wine as a peace treaty.
Miss Petrillo was the only person who you gave that wine to?
Yes, the other wedding parties had Horizon wine as the gift instead.
You wanted Miss Petrillo to drink that wine alone?
Okay, Counselor, it looks like time has been called.
Okay, sorry, Your Honor, I couldn't see that. Thank you.
No, that's not a problem. We'll let the witness answer this question very briefly.
Can you say the question one more time, please?
Sure, I can say it again. You wanted Miss Petrillo to drink that wine alone, right?
Yes, I did, because that was a special blend that I offered to her, being that Casey's the one who named it Cara. I figured it was a good gift for Genesis to enjoy alone.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, in that case, Mrs. Martini may be excused. Timekeepers, how close are we to all loss at the moment?
I believe if my timing was right, we have half an hour. It's 5 o'clock. That is our all loss.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I see no reason why we can't take a 5-minute break. I thought we had far less time. So in that case, let's be back I'm sorry, I'm in Arizona time. So whatever time it is in your guys' time zone, 35, if that makes sense. Okay, we should be back up and running. I see my co-judges here. Could someone from defense and plaintiff just let us know that you guys are back, or at least that the closers are back?
I'm ready to go, Your Honor, from the plaintiff.
Sounds good. Defense?
The defense is ready to proceed.
Excellent. Okay. In that case, defense has rested its case in chief. Plaintiff, do you have a closing argument for today's case?
Yes, Your Honor.
Then you may proceed.
And Your Honor, can I have my timekeeper up on the with her camera on over the course of this?
Oh yeah, go for it.
And Your Honor, I'm going to be referencing in the closing argument, I'm going to be referencing two pieces of evidence, one of which is already pre-admitted. That's Exhibit 1, the photo of Genesis Petrillo, and Exhibit 24, which we've admitted.
To my understanding, that's okay. Does defense have any problems with that?
No, Your Honor, that's fine with the defense.
Excellent. Okay.
May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court. The defendant promised, and the defendant delivered. Members of the jury, this is Genesis Petrillo, a sister, a daughter, a friend, and a soon-to-be bride. She had plans to move to France as a newlywed, start up a career in a new place, have a happy life. But those plans were cut short and her dreams were crushed when her life ended on the morning of her wedding. You see, the night before, Miss Petrillo was given a bottle of wine with poison in it. The person who gave her this bottle of poisoned wine was the defendant, Harper Martini. That's why today we're suing the defendant for battery. Because throughout the course of this trial, we've shown you that the defendant's actions were the reason for this tragedy. But since we're the plaintiff in today's case, we couldn't just say that. We had to prove it. We had to prove by a preponderance of the evidence, just meaning more likely than not, that the defendant, Harper Martini, intentionally poisoned Genesis Petrillo's wine, and that poison was the cause of her death. We've met our burden in today's case because we showed you that the defendant promised and the defendant delivered. Let's talk about all the ways that we've met our burden in today's case. That the defendant poisoned first, that the defendant poisoned Genesis Petrillo's wine. And second, that the wine was the most likely cause of her death. Let's start with that first point. How we know that the defendant poisoned Miss Petrillo's wine. You heard from Miss Angel Rodriguez, one of the bridesmaids at the wedding. You heard from Miss Rodriguez that the defendant and Miss Petrillo would argue constantly. And that it got to the point where on the day of the rehearsal, Miss Petrillo said she was afraid that the defendant was going to kill her. Miss Rodriguez also told you that on the night before the wedding, the night before Genesis Petrillo's death, she overheard the defendant say directly to Miss Petrillo that she would make her disappear. Miss Rodriguez also told us that she saw the defendant carrying a bottle of pesticides into the kitchen, and that the defendant told her the pesticides were for pests like Genesis. We also heard the same thing from Sam Arnold, the caterer for the wedding. On the night of the rehearsal dinner, she also saw the defendant carrying a bottle of pesticides to the wine storage room, heard her say the same thing that Miss Rodriguez heard. But you don't even have to take Miss Rodriguez or Miss Arnold's word for it. We heard today from the defendant herself that she hated Miss Petrillo and that she would do anything to get her out of her life. We heard from the defendant that it was her dream for Casey Soto to take over her business after she retired, that she hated Miss Petrillo for taking her child away from her, threatening to move to a different country. She hated Miss Petrillo from the beginning of their relationship all the way to the end. And we know that the defendant wasn't joking around when she said that, because we showed you the note that she wrote to Miss Petrillo a week before her death. Members of the jury, this is a confession. Look at the things that the defendant tells Miss Petrillo just a week before her death. I need you out of our lives. Leave Casey, and the enclosed $300,000 is yours. Otherwise, I'll take you out of the picture the hard way. Choose wisely. The defendant's words speak for themselves. These aren't the words of a concerned parent. These are the words of a vindictive person promising to get rid of someone who stood in their way. And we know that the defendant followed through on that promise. And that brings me to my second point, that we know that the pesticides were what caused Ms. Petrillo's death. You heard from Dr. Kwan today, a medical doctor and an expert in the field of pesticide-related deaths. Dr. Kwan was the first physician to see Ms. Petrillo and the first to treat her for her sudden illness. Dr. Kwan told us today that Ms. Petrillo showed textbook symptoms of pesticide poisoning, and that a later test of her stomach and blood contents proved that to be true. Dr. Kwan showed us that it's unlikely to be anything other than pesticide poisoning due to the specific symptoms that Ms. Petrillo showed. Dr. Kwan also analyzed a sample of the wine within Ms. Petrillo's stomach and the wine found in a bottle that the defendant gave her. Dr. Kwan found that the pesticides were the same and concluded that the pesticides were the cause of Ms. Petrillo's death. But you don't even need to take Dr. Kwan's word for it, because the defense's own expert, Dr. Cannon, agrees with it. When my co-counsel was cross-examining Dr. Cannon, we found out that Dr. Cannon agrees with Dr. Kwan, that it was more likely than not that the pesticides were what caused Genesis Petrillo's death. Dr. Cannon also agrees that it was more likely than not that the pesticides that killed Ms. Petrillo came from that bottle of wine the defendant gave her. Folks, the science doesn't lie. Both experts on both sides agree that the most likely cause of Ms. Petrillo's death was the pesticides in that bottle of wine. Members of the jury, after looking at all the evidence and all of the facts, it's clear. We've shown that when things didn't go her way, the defendant promised to take care of Ms. Petrillo the hard way, and we've shown that she delivered on that promise. That's why we ask you to find the defendant liable for battery. Thank you.
Thank you. Defense, closing arguments?
Yes, Your Honor. If I may have just a moment to get my camera situated.
Not a problem. Take your time.
May I begin?
You may.
The dose makes the poison. That's what my co-counsel, Mr. Vinny Krupp, said to you today during opening statements. Because in today's case, the dose is everything. You see, Mr. Azari just told you that Genesis died of pesticide poisoning simply because there was some unknown amount of it in her blood. But what Mr. Azari could not tell you was the actual amount of isofynfos pesticide Genesis actually consumed. While the plaintiff tried to distract you with stories of a mother protecting her child, they can't get around the fact that they failed to provide a dosage that Genesis actually consumed, and they failed to prove that the dosage Genesis consumed wasn't within the safe levels provided by the FDA. The dose makes the poison, so ladies and gentlemen, if there is no dose, there is no poison. What happened to Genesis was a tragedy, but it wasn't battery. After a stressful afternoon of wedding planning and an exciting evening of a wedding rehearsal, Genesis drank more alcohol than her body could handle. But instead of just vomiting and other symptoms, this time Genesis went into a coma and died. Because on June 8th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo died of alcohol poisoning. Now, the plaintiff holds the only burden in this trial. They had to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that every element of the claim of battery was more likely than not committed. Now, battery is broken up into 3 prongs. First, they had to prove that Harper committed an act. Second, they had to prove that Harper intended to harm Genesis. And third, they had to prove that Genesis was harmed by that act. Now, members of the jury, it's the plaintiff's burden to prove each and every element of battery, and they failed to do so because they failed to prove the 3rd prong of battery. They failed to prove that any harmful contact occurred to Genesis Petrillo due to pesticide poisoning, or that Harper ever put pesticides in the bottle at all. And because they failed to prove Genesis's cause of death, ladies and gentlemen, without causation for Petrillo's death, there is no battery. Now, the plaintiff has argued that on June 7th, 2019, the owner of Peony Estates placed pesticide into a bottle of Cara wine with the intent to harm Genesis Petrillo. And they weave a nice story of a scorned mother trying to protect her only child, but the reality is that the plaintiff is grasping for straws because their nice little story is riddled with holes. Now, first we'll take a look at causation, because in order to prove that Harper was liable for Genesis's death, the plaintiff had to prove both direct and proximate causation. Direct causation is proven if the plaintiff shows that without Harper's action, Genesis never would have been hurt. Since the plaintiff can't prove that pesticides caused Genesis' death, they can't prove the direct cause. This means that the proximate cause, that the plaintiff's harm was reasonably foreseeable consequence of Harper's action, is also disproven if the plaintiff can't even prove Genesis Petrillo's cause of death. Now, the idea of any pesticides in the food or drink we consume may seem alarming, but the plaintiffs are relying on this alone to prove their case. Because the fact of the matter is that there's trace amounts of pesticides on many of the things we consume. That's why it's the FDA's role to ensure that pesticide levels don't exceed safe levels that are deemed safe. You heard about these limits from Dr. Cannon earlier today, and about how isofenfos has a reporting limit as well. So while the plaintiff wants you to believe that any pesticides in the wine would kill Genesis, simply not supported by the facts. And there's the utter lack of dosage information for Genesis Petrillo. The plaintiff called Dr. Kwan to tell you that Genesis died of isofenfos poisoning, but the same doctor couldn't tell you the amount of isofenfos in her blood. And this is because the only test Dr. Kwan ran tested for the presence of isofenfos and not the amount. Yet another hole in the plaintiff's story is the act itself. They've made the incredulous claim that Harper Martini intentionally placed pesticides into a bottle of Cara wine and gave this bottle to Genesis Petrillo. But members of the jury, where's their evidence? Throughout today's trial, the plaintiff was unable to provide you with a single piece of reliable evidence that proves Harper tampered with the bottle before giving it to Genesis. Beyond this, they didn't even attempt to explain how Harper could have gotten the pesticide into a sealed bottle. After all, if she supposedly poisoned this bottle, then there should have been tools she used to do it. But the plaintiff didn't provide you with any contaminated funnels. They didn't provide you with a needle that could get into this, that could not break the seal. They couldn't provide you any reliable evidence because there isn't any, because Harper didn't do it. After all, why would she risk losing her child, her only family, and the business she worked her whole life to build over something she could have solved through talking? She told you herself that if they had come to it, she was prepared to tell Casey about the other person Genesis had been seeing, because that was her last resort, not poison. As the defense in today's trial, we have nothing to prove to you. We have no burden. We don't have to prove the cause of Genesis' death. But despite this, Dr. Cannon still provided you with evidence that Genesis may have actually died of alcohol poisoning. Now, even their own witnesses couldn't prove their claims because they wanted you to believe that Angel Rodriguez could prove Harper did it, except Angel is hardly a credible witness. You heard from her own testimony that Angel had been drinking so much that night, she had gaps in her memory, but that she was still drunk the next day. You also heard that that Angel has poured her time and money into this case, that she needs Harper to be found guilty, that she's voluntarily testifying to make certain it happens. To make matters worse, on redirect, she couldn't even tell us what time she stopped drinking without help. Now, was she so drunk that she didn't remember, or was she making it all up? Then their own Dr. Kwan admitted that he also believed Petrillo may have had alcohol poisoning when she first came in, that all of her symptoms pointed to alcohol poisoning. Now, all the plaintiff has in today's trial are words. They don't have any actual evidence. They couldn't provide you with any physical evidence of their claims. But despite what the plaintiff would like you to believe, it doesn't matter how Harper Martini felt about Genesis. Because if they can't prove that Genesis died of pesticide poisoning, then they've already failed to meet their burden. Because members of the jury, Genesis' death was nothing short of heartbreaking, but it wasn't due to pesticides, and it wasn't because of Harper Martini. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Harper's not liable for Genesis Petrillo's death because the dose makes the poison, and there was, and still is, no dose. And there was, and still is, no evidence that Harper put anything into the sealed bottle. Without proving Petrillo's cause of death or an act by Harper, plaintiff has not met their burden, and you must find Harper Martini not liable. Thank you.
Thank you. Plaintiff, any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. Can I have my timekeeper show her camera as well?
Go for it.
Can I understand I have 1 minute and 45 seconds? Okay. May I proceed?
You may.
Ms. Coulson just got up here and she said that the dosage makes the poison. That might sound nice. It might be a little catchy, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make any sense. And the reason that we know it doesn't make any sense is because Ms. Coulson's own expert disagrees with her. She just got up here and for 8 minutes told you that because we don't know the exact dosage of pesticides in Genesis Petrillo's system, that we can't say it's more likely than not that the pesticides were in his system. And members of the jury, that doesn't make any sense, because if it were to make sense, you'd have to disagree with the two medical experts in this case. Dr. Kwan got up here, he told you it was more likely than not that the pesticides caused Genesis Petrillo's death. Dr. Kwan told you it was more likely than not that the pesticides came from the bottle of wine the defendant gave. Dr. Cannon told you the exact same thing. Because of that, we know that the dosage doesn't make the poison. We know that the dosage is just a distraction. It's a distraction from the defendant's promise and the defendant carrying out that promise. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thus ends our case. Give the judges a moment to work on scoring and ranks. And at least for me, and I'll let the scoring judge do the same. I need a couple of people to say something into the mic just so I can get faces with the names. Could I have the plaintiff mid say something into the mic real quick?
Hello.
Attorney-wise.
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry. One more time. Your picture did not come through for some reason.
Andrew, would it be easier to just ask people to turn on their cameras?
That would be great if possible, yes. I unfortunately cannot see gallery view on my computer for some reason. So that's why I need them to speak into the mic and have their cameras on, obviously. So plaintiff mid, could you go for it?
Do you have anything specific you want me to say?
No, just that right there is perfect. Plaintiff opener.
Hello there. I am the plaintiff opener.
Thank you. And defense mid.
Hello, Your Honor.
One more time, I didn't swap over.
Hello. Hi.
Thank you very much. And then Ms. Rodriguez, could you say something into the mic?
Oh, her mic doesn't work.
I see.
I think it stopped working for some reason.
That's fine. Well, in that case, can I get, and I am blanking on the other witness you called the expert. Who was the third? Yes. Could they say something into the mic?
That's me. I'm Sam Arnold.
That's right. Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I need. If my scoring judge needs anything, please help him out. But
just a minute to finish up with the rankings. What was the character name for plaintiff number 2? Witness?
Sam Arnold.
Emma, thank you.
Hmm?
And defense number 1, witness?
Oh, as just the name, Austin Lewis. Yeah. As far as both the honors go, I do have a list of roles for defense. If you want, I can just paste that into the chat.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, for it.
All right, Andrew, do you want to take first comments or do you want me to go?
How about you go ahead? I've been talking all day. I'll let Scott know that we're all done.
Awesome. All right, well, first of all, you can breathe now that you're done. I'm so impressed everyone was off in notes, and y'all are better than real life attorneys, so you should everyone feel great about yourselves for everything. In all seriousness, this was a wonderful trial to watch. Both teams looked polished. Both teams had compelling material, and there were a lot of high scores, at least on my ballot. I guess by way of introductions, first of all, my name is Ed Slasky. I am currently in grad school, not in law school, but in a 4-year AMTA alum, played both witnesses and attorneys. And because witnesses never get the love they deserve from judges, I'm going to focus my comments on witnesses. Andrew, I don't know what you're planning on doing, but
I don't know anything about witnesses, so this is good.
All right. So I guess just some general things to start. Both openers hit their theme early. That is wonderful. Like, bless your heart, especially at the beginning of the year. Thank you for that. Compelling stories for both openers as well. The plaintiff, there were a couple of spots where I could tell there was a period in the sentence and you were speaking as if it was a comma in the sentence. So just slow down like just a touch. It wasn't, like consistent throughout, but just like I think 2 or 3 times I noticed that coming.
Hey, Ed, I'm sorry. Scott says that he hasn't received your ballot yet.
Oh, all right. Well, give me 30 seconds then. Click through here.
Bureaucratic busy work. What can you say?
Oh, okay. That would be why. Okay, that should be good to go. Sorry about that. All right, and then getting into the examinations, starting on the plaintiff side, there were both like the witness and attorney here. Y'all had some good rapport, following up specifically for the attorney on witnesses' questions. There was some, paralleling of the language there that worked really well. A couple of times the attorney had some highbrowed language that I thought was a little iffy, but again, nothing like egregious. Witness, and there were that is the tick that I noticed. There were some like emotional appeals to the content of what your testimony was that I thought you could have matched a little better with like the emotion in your presentation, in your voice. But yeah, that was sort of the big thing I would work on, and the rapport stood out as very good. On cross, there were a couple of points where I thought you could fight back just a hair more, which I know like the standard comment from judges is like, oh, you were too fighty. Tough line to walk. It sucks. But particularly there was a question about like, oh, well, you were still drunk the next morning. That as a judge, like, I don't know how often it is that like I'm still drunk the next morning after I was drinking the night before. So I don't know exactly what it says in your affidavit, but just kind of like maybe trying to sidestep that or like fight it a little more than you did. I think you had some room there. Crosser, good going step by step, and just kind of poking holes in the story, leading the witness to the water, but not making the witness drink from the well. Nice job. Onto witness number 2. The shrimp reference, was that on purpose? Was that a Bubba Gump? I loved it. I thought that was one of the most clever references I've heard in a long time. Yeah, I noted character and accent right off the bat. Let's see if you keep it up. You did a good job with that. It drifted a little bit on cross, but for the most part, you were solid on both the character and the accent. Let's see. Again, you had, it wasn't necessarily like an or an and kind of tick, but in affirming or denying answers, I forget what exactly it was. It was, well, okay, it was I did for affirming, and it was maybe I did not, something like that for denying, but it was like, it got to a point where it was like every single answer was like, I did, I did not, I did, I did not. Change that up maybe a little bit, not a huge point, but yeah, crept into my consciousness. Let's go on to number 3 on the plaintiff. Really good expert energy. It was clean. You struck a pretty good balance between like scientific jargon and then kind of putting that in layman's terms. I think you could go just a tad more on explaining some of those terms, but it was overall, especially for like October, fantastic. For the attorney there were a couple of points, again, where you said like, I want to talk about blank, or just like transitions that felt a tad bit stilted. So, and then there was one in particular, you said something so-and-so proved that it was most likely. Again, little things, but like verbiage like that, proved that it's most likely is, it just struck me as a little bit off. The crossing attorney versus the witness being crossed, I thought was a fantastic back and forth. Particularly for the attorney here, there were a couple of points where you're kind of trying to push for a yes no that I might have let that go a little farther, but that's really just a judge by judge thing. The pushback from the witness, I thought, was good overall, and I was really enjoying that kind of back and forth there. On to the defense side. Okay, the defense number one. This was another really good character. I have a couple notes from the very beginning that like this is either a lot of background for what's going to be like a half character, or it's taking you a minute to get to like a full character. I wasn't quite sure if it was like a halfway thing, or this was really what you were going to lean into for the entire direct. It ended up being something that you really leaned into. I would bring that out a little more heavily just on quite literally number one, number two questions, because it took till like that third, fourth, fifth question to really get me there with you in terms of what you're trying to do with your character. A couple of real like subtle, just nice points that you had for your case, things that you didn't really like spend an entire answer on, but just kind of mentioned in passing that were really important, to putting the pesticide in the dumpster with the wine bottle. Also on your cross, there were a few times where the attorney didn't even really leave that much room for you to run, but you kind of made room for yourself to run on her questions. I thought that was really nice. The objections here from your directing attorney, again, really good. That's just one of those things as the crosser, like you're going to see those more and more the more tournaments you go to. And I think you saw some good ones today. For the last two here, the expert and the defendant, these are tough jobs, both of them, especially this expert is like, well, yes, I agree with everything, but maybe it could have been different. You did about as good a job as I could have expected for pushing back on your cross, and for what's the name of the defendant? I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it.
Harper Martini, I think.
Yes. Okay. So for Harper, this was it was just solid overall. Similar notes to a lot of the other witnesses. There were a few points where I thought the pushback, it was kind of like some odd places that you chose to push versus not push. But overall, you were believable. I liked how you kind of stayed like calm and composed throughout the entirety of both examinations, and was really impressed overall. If you have more specific questions, I am going to hang out for a minute, but I'm going to turn the floor over to Andrew.
Excellent. Thank you, Ed. My name's Andrew Simpson. I'm a four-year Mocker alum from Hillsdale College as well. Ed is not from Hillsdale College, but as well as for the 4 years. I never did witnesses. I only did attorneys, largely because I could not keep a straight face the first year when we were talking about age discrimination, because I have very old relatives and none of them were bothered by age discrimination when we talked about it at home. Ultimately, most of my comments are going to be for the attorneys as a result. My comments for the witnesses are just remember that you are supposed to be human beings. Like, yes, have characters, those are fine, but don't make your answers strange to how an actual human being would respond. Because when you get away from us mocker alums who are amused by this and you get into with real judges, they're just going to think you're really, really weird at times. I didn't see anything really awful today, but just keep that in the back of your mind. Attorney-wise, everybody needs to work on objections. A couple people did know the distinction of objections very, very well. For instance, the plaintiff closer actually knew the difference between 602 and 701, which is very, very common mistake. Everybody just uses them interchangeably. They're not. They're very different. But he did use them properly in that regard, and I encourage everyone to review it. Also, be aware of what charge you're pursuing, plaintiff. There were a couple of you guys that stepped over the line that did seem to go into the realm of negligence. I did shut that down a little bit harder just because some years, I don't know if any of you guys were in it 1-2 years ago, it was grounds for a mistrial if you stepped over the line into the other charge. Like your whole team could just lose the ballots for that round. And it was specifically set in case law. I don't know if it's that way this year, so don't be horrified, don't panic, don't go back to your judge and say, oh, I nearly cost us the round. Not even close, but just be aware that that can be something AMTA will throw at you occasionally. Attorneys, just as a point, since we are on Zoom, be aware that when you look anywhere else outside the realm of the camera, I think you're looking at notes. I didn't mark anyone down for it, okay? Just be aware if this format continues on, that might not be something you want your judges thinking. And I'm sure all of you were off notes, to be honest, but that is just something that's working in the back of our mind. A couple points on the witnesses. I've seen 4 years of mock trial. Defendant, this is the worst defendant I've ever seen. Like, that letter is brutal. I would personally just own up and describe the bad sentences in it. Like you listed the first 5 sentences in there, gave perfect explanations, but then my eyesight immediately went to sentence 6 where you're like, I will remove you by force if it comes down to it. And I was like, oh, you're not going to explain this? We're just going to leave this hanging for plaintiff to come in on cross-examination. So I'd honestly hit it in your direct examination, provide me some story about how this is not you killing Genesis or something like that, but that's what I would go for. Character witness wise, Mr. Lewis, you did a fabulous job. Yes, Kirby Doolittle's an idiot. He has not improved IQ level wise in 4 years. So he's been at like an IQ of 70 ever since 2016 and he hasn't gotten above it. However, Mr. Lewis does show one aspect that at least I personally think witnesses can do. If the judge does not look like he is going to get mad at a witness for running away with an attorney, I think the witness should do it a little bit, okay? And attorneys, if you have a problem with a witness, if they are straying too far outside of a closed-ended question, it's your job to ask me, Your Honor, I just asked that this witness be restricted to a yes or no on this question. And most judges will say, yeah, you know what, that was way outside the realm, stick to a yes or no, and the witness looks bad. Or they'll say, well, no, I think the witness was within bounds, and you'll get a little bit of a read on the judge, but they'll think you're impressive for asking that as a result. Expert-wise, plaintiff expert, you did a phenomenal job, and this goes for both experts. I would incorporate some demonstratives of some sort. I think it would improve both of your guys' performance quite a bit. You guys were very, very good already. Like, I'm impressed for October, and I think you guys got this case late. But I would incorporate some demonstratives, making it easier for the jury to follow what you're saying as well. And one final big point on case theories. I followed plaintiff's case theory very, very well. Defense, I got a little bit confused at first. I thought you were trying to say that pesticide had gotten into the bottle after the event, and therefore it wasn't possible that she had poisoned it, okay? Or I thought you were saying that it got in at a future date or at a previous date and had somehow sunk into the bottle and Harper wasn't responsible for it. But I wasn't quite sure which road you were going down. So ultimately, I'd just make that a little bit clearer. Again, this might just be confusion on my part, but that's all I have to say on that. So if you have any questions, I can stick around as well. Otherwise, you guys are free to go. It was a very good round across the board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Nice night.
Thank you.
I actually do have one question for you guys. If you guys just could stay for a little bit.
Go for it.
I historically do not do well with accents, so I just kind of wanted to get almost like a poll, like what you guys thought of it.
Yeah, I thought. I mean, it didn't really sway me one way or the other. In fact, I think what I was most impressed by with you was your character, was the responses that you were giving. I mean, you were high energy, but I didn't read it so much as like, oh, this guy's doing a Brooklyn or a vaguely northeastern accent. Yeah, I thought the character worked very well, and it wasn't really hurt at all by whatever kind of accent you were throwing in there.
I very much agree with that. I maybe heard one time where the accent broke, but your accent was subtle enough I didn't even realize you were doing an accent at first. So it wasn't until you broke out very briefly on Cross where I was like, oh, he's in an accent. So I love the character though. The character was great.
Thank you guys.
Can I just say, can I say I'm on his bench and I didn't know he was doing an accent? Like, that's how good it was. But like I wasn't aware, and I was like, Zach doesn't normally sound like that, but today he does apparently.
It's the headphones, right?
It is, yeah.
It was the headphones. Like things are bulky.
I just have a really quick question. On Angel Rodriguez's direct, I know there was a part where I objected to Genesis Petrillo statements for hearsay, and you overruled my objection, but you kind of made it sound like there was something else you wanted me to say. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, it's an interpretation of 8033. It depends on, I would try and make it sound like, oh, these statements are so far from the event that they are not a then existing mental condition. They're providing something in the past, they're a memory, if that makes sense. And I actually probably would have sustained your objection in that regard. It's personal choice on my part, and additionally, 8033 doesn't have like a any time tied to it. It's not like immediate. However, the further away it gets, the less likely it is it's a then existing impression or feeling or whatever, and more of a memory, which the rule clearly says this is not supposed to be used for memory, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was just wondering because I was trying to figure out the best way to argue with that objection because I've had issues with it in the past, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
8033 is a tough one because of 8031, which does have a time to it as well. So I'd just watch it in that regard.
Thank you.
Not a problem.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you guys?
Not bad, not bad. You know, always a good feeling at the end of the day. Judging.
Yeah, great feeling. I just wanted to see if you guys had more feedback regarding my open or my cross and some of the objections that I gave. I mean, I have some specifics as well, but I wanted to know if you guys had any thoughts on that, ways to improve it, given the whole Zoom format as well.
I mean, your cross, your direct were killer, man. Like the objections you had were solid, thought out. It's very clear that you understand MRE. Honestly, the only reason I sustained the asked and answered objections against you is because it's an expert, and I directed experts all throughout undergraduate. And the judge's comment always is, oh, they're an expert. They get to say whatever they want type of thing.
You hated
if it had been any character witness whatsoever, I would have been like, oh, heck no. This is totally asked and answered at this point. So, but yes.
No, so it was a good objection to me because I think that's the tough thing sometimes is, and you guys are very good, especially having done mock. You might say you don't have a good poker face, but I feel like you definitely do. Like there were many times that I was like looking over and I was like, oh, like he's reacting to something. So when you were sustaining those objections, I just didn't know if it was, when you overruled the objection, I didn't know if it was a bad objection to make or if it was just, the thought in the moment of let's, give them some leeway.
Oh no, I loved all the objections you made. Like I believe my first sentence in your comment is excellent objections usually. So if I overruled one of your objections or sustained one against you, it's for arbitrary reasons based on my experience more than anything else. I especially liked some of your objections because they were technical enough. They were right on the line, which I really, really enjoy those objections. I hate the objections where it's just like hearsay and it's like, yeah, I don't even need to hear a response from the other side. This is totally hearsay.
Yeah.
So but I would keep making those objections.
Yeah, that sounds. And anything regarding for both of you regarding the opening, or Ed, I don't know if you have any other comments regarding.
Yeah, I mean the opening. I think this is the first tournament that I'm judging online, but the like being close or far from the camera has been kind of a tricky point in the statements that I've seen, and you'll get a lot of people who are kind of like here with their hands landing, and it's like just halfway in the screen. I thought you did a really nice job of like stepping back a little bit. I could kind of see a little more of your like torso out in front of your.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah.
So that is a really good choice. Keep doing that, as far as I'm concerned.
Also, stand up. Like, I love that you stood up. I judged one round this morning where one side just sat, and we can't mark you down for it, but you look better standing up. I don't know what Ed thinks, but that's my opinion.
Do you recommend doing that for directs and crosses as well, or not?
I wouldn't. I'd just do it for statements, but that's only me personally.
Yeah, I think it's most noticeable on statements, just because, I mean, especially as an attorney, on direct, like, your witness is really the star, basically the one getting the attention, and on cross a little less so, but it's still that back and forth. It's a little less just people looking at you the entire time. I thought, as far as like the content of the opening, there was a line right at the beginning where you had like, oh, this was it was tragedy, it was a heartbreak, but it was not a crime. I think that sort of like real slow, purposeful, like forceful drawing your line, I guess, at the very beginning of particularly an opening is a really good move. Yeah, I think, as Andrew was saying, like the themes are always so tough, especially early in the year. I got it at the beginning. It, I think could be maybe sprinkled in a little bit more, but even
throughout the opening itself or throughout the case, because I completely agree with you. I don't think our case has as much of a theme as it should have, maybe, but
yeah, no, I mean, I'm thinking right now, even in the opening. I mean, this is just like from my notes from 3 hours ago. I had for the plaintiff, like I had their theme circled right away. For you guys, it was I had like the theme with a question mark at the end, and then I checked it off during closing. So
wait, what did you think the theme was, out of curiosity?
Yeah, I was saying that might just be me, missed it a couple times, but yeah, I mean, I thought it was a good theme. It was a good line to take, but maybe just a couple more times, or a couple, you emphasize it more, like with your inflection or your pacing when you are bringing it up in your open. But that's really the only major thing that I had for your open.
Anything that you guys saw that was maybe, I don't know, nitpicky, even if it's like small, I don't know, you can practice, and I'm sure you guys both know this, you practice, and then you're in the trial and it's totally different. It's the last question I have, by the way. I'll let you guys go. But was there any last things that I can just take from the trial that you guys would do?
I have one point on your opening. Mm-hmm. I did not like when you gestured towards opposing counsel.
Okay.
It's only my choice, and it's just because where you are sitting on my computer, you gestured the wrong direction.
Okay.
So I'm not for sure when you say opposing counsel was just up here and said that, I'm not for sure I gesture. Okay, that's just me anymore. Yeah. Obviously, when you're back in the courtroom, heck yeah.
Yeah, I was like,
right over those horrible human beings over at the plaintiff table. But right now, I'm not for sure I'd do it. The plaintiff closer also did it, and it came off a little bit weird to me. But I'm being very nitpicky there. So
I appreciate it. I really do. I appreciate it.
That's one of those. I mean, I didn't pick up on the directional thing as you were doing it, but like I opened when I was an attorney. I loved a good like dramatic point.
Yeah, when you point at them and you're like opposing counsel.
Yeah.
But when you do it on Zoom and you're pointing, at like Zach's face or like a blank screen with like a letter on it because somebody's camera's off, I feel like the emotion of it just kind of gets taken down a little bit. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys judging. I appreciate the feedback. Yeah.
What schools were you guys, out of curiosity?
I have literally no idea what the other school was. I could not, because I think we were supposed to go to one school and then it switched to another. So I don't know. I don't want to give no information. But we were Miami.
Say that again.
Miami. University?
I was literally.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
I was trying to pick it out, and I knew the other school, for your information, was Richmond.
Yeah.
But yeah, I recognized a couple people on their team just throughout the course of the trial, and I was thinking, like, trying to place you guys. Didn't really recognize anyone, but some of the strategic choices, I was like, this seems like a Miami kind of team.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I scored your guys' A team this morning. If you want any advice, go talk to your plaintiff closer. She is incredibly good. She will smooth out any small hiccups you have. You do not have many, but.
Perfect. She's actually a very good friend of mine, so I'm sure she's gonna be very glad to hear that.
She had an excellent close. It was one of the best I've seen this year.
She's a phenomenal competitor, hands down. But I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I think I'm late for comments with our coach, so I'm gonna go jump and do that. But I appreciate it. I will. I'll talk to you guys later.
Yep.
Have a good day.
You too.
Well, Ed, it was fun scoring with you. So.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for presiding. And I'm done for the weekend, but if you're still going, good luck in rounds.
Oh no, I'm done as well.
Nice.
You can only hear the same case so many times in a weekend.
Exactly.